There isn't much to be happy about in this world. 25-year-old Yusahi's life is abruptly ended by a truck, leaving him with a chilly void in his chest from the unchosen end. He hears a voice in his last moments, as if it were coming from the sky. It informs him that a special career awaits him in the new world, but before he can fully understand it, the rest disappears into the shadows. The next thing he knows, he's in an odd office waiting in line for a mysterious reincarnation profession assignment. He calls the person in front of him a monk, wishes him a happy new life, and then vanishes in a dazzling blaze of light. A person waiting in front of the hero mutters to themselves, speculating about their future career. The atmosphere is tense. When the next individual is revealed, Yusuke freezes in dismay. He is unable to determine whether this is all a dream or if he is actually reincarnating into a different world. Just as he was talking about his future career, the man bursts into a story about how he was struck by a massive truck that weighed 10 tons. He obviously takes pride in this, treating it like a feat. People in his immediate vicinity stare at him in confusion, not understanding how he can brag about such nonsense. The boy was immediately given the title of apprentice magician since he was next in line. The weight of the truck and the level of the profession appeared to be unrelated, as though everything depended on chance rather than the circumstances of death. Our hero, Yusahi, came next. He was assigned to work in the family business as a pastry chef. My stomach nodded in shock. No magic, no battles, just baked goods and sweets. As he opened his mouth to ask what it all meant, a strange energy swept over him, and the man wanted to enjoy his new life. Everything around him vanished in an instant, as though the landscape had changed and the world had suddenly snapped its fingers. After reincarnation, he came to the realization that he had no choice in his career. His opinion was meaningless because everything had already been decided. He felt right away that everything was different when he appeared in the middle of a street in a strange place. The street was deserted and had an odd, almost surreal appearance. It was a far cry from the world Yusa had known. The city didn't look like Japan today. Yusuf froze when he saw his reflection in a puddle on the damp sidewalk. He was dressed in the same clothes and had the same appearance. If he was still in his body and everything appeared to be a continuation of his past life, then what good was reincarnation? He saw a group of adventurers strolling down the street the next instant. Clad in armor and robes, they walked with confidence and their faces fixed intently. Then, at last, he understood that he was in a different world and that everything that was taking place was a new reality rather than a dream. Keeping his distance to avoid drawing attention to himself, Yusuf made the decision to follow the adventurers. Before long, he heard bits and pieces of their conversation. They talked about witches, witch hunts, and future quests. In a mocking taunt, one of the adventurers even claimed that if anyone was the target of all the curses, it was the person who had originally suggested the witch hunt. It seemed amazing to Yusuf, who was thrilled and understood every word. He could understand the language of another world as clearly as if it were his own. The adventurers soon arrived at the dungeon's entrance. Yusuf was shocked to discover that he could read the local alphabet just as easily as his native tongue after seeing a sign above the enormous gate. He stopped as he watched them leave, wondering for a moment if this was their job, something as ordinary as the store or office in his old life. As he started to look around, he saw that the area he was in was far bigger than it initially appeared. It was a bustling center for adventurers, not just the entrance to a dungeon. There were stalls everywhere, offering food, weapons, and potions. In this new world, the hum of voices blended into an odd symphony, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh bread, metal, and roasting meat. Yusuf's stomach growled as he saw one of the food stalls. He became acutely aware that he had not eaten since his death, and that he was gradually becoming tired. The sensation was only heightened by the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasting meat. After searching his pockets, he discovered that he had not a single coin to purchase anything. The proprietor of one of the stalls angrily told Yusuf, "If you're hungry, go and earn it." It sounded impolite, but it was also straightforward and businesslike as he started to consider how he could make at least a little money. Yusuf scowled. He was aware that he couldn't simply enter the dungeon unprepared, unarmed, and with no idea of what was waiting for him there. Most significantly, he was only a pastry chef, and he was devastated to learn this. And all of a sudden he realized. He was actually a pastry chef. Someone who knew how to make sweets, but not a hero, a warrior, or a mage. The idea seemed ridiculous at first, almost pitiful, But then something inside of him shifted. Maybe that's exactly where his strength was. There was a reason why the world had selected this line of work for him. When Yusa heard the hint that all it took to open your own shop was the word open, he tensed in surprise. He started to look around and soon saw a blank space by the wall where he imagined a store could be set up with ease. The location appeared unassuming, almost remote, and he hoped no one was around to bother him or make fun of him. The moment he said the word discovery, Yusuf felt strange things materialize in his hands. He was shocked to see that his clothes had also changed when he looked down. The pastries, he thought, looked different. However, these candies were identical to those Yusuke had consumed as a kid. He could have recognized the wrappers without a doubt, even though the names might have been different and the writing might have been in odd letters. However, Yusuke had absolutely no prior sales experience. He was aware that if he didn't do something, he wouldn't be able to live. Taking a deep breath, he summoned the last of his courage and started calling out to people, doing his best to offer them candy. However, people went by. Nobody even gave him a sidelong glance. Yusuf then saw one of the passing adventurers lift his head and give him a glare as he shouted the word dagashi, meaning inexpensive Japanese sweets, once more. Yusuf's heart stopped, and he fell silent at once due to the intense gaze. He flinched, as though he were facing a predator. Thoughts piled up in his mind, heavy and oppressive. In a world dominated by magic and swords, was it even feasible to make a living selling inexpensive candies? His voice grew weaker and more uncertain, nearly breaking as he continued to shout out his proposals in an aimless manner. In the hopes that someone would at least turn around, he continued, almost crying, saying the words of invitation repeatedly. Then, out of nowhere, a girl with a faint smile and a joyful, inspired expression stood out against the gray crowd. Uncomfortably, Yusuf inquired if she enjoyed dagashi. The girl approached, looking interestedly at the display case. When her eyes landed on the candy, her smile grew even wider. She referred to the candies as cute, without a moment's hesitation, as though she had witnessed something genuinely enchanted. Curious, the girl pointed to one of the candies and inquired as to its type. Trying to look confident but a little perplexed, Yusuf responded that it was chewing gum and gave the price, 10 yen. But then he recalled that there was no such thing as yen in this world. Then a system window appeared directly in front of his face, glowing a gentle blue. It contained a neat list of the gum's ingredients, quantity, price, and even its magical properties. As the scent persisted, it turned out that the gum restored 1 unit of magical power every 10 seconds. Strawberry was listed as a separate flavor. Yusuf picked up the gum, held it up to his eye level, and smiled slightly as he showed it to the girl, feeling a little more confident. When he declared that it only cost 10 lima, his voice became more firm. But the girl's expression changed to one of perplexity. She was intrigued by the chewing gum but obviously didn't know what it was. It was immediately apparent to Yusuf that this world had never seen anything like it. With great enthusiasm, he started to describe the product. You can chew gum for a long time without drinking water, making it a convenient snack. Additionally, it replenishes 6 units of magic power per minute while the scent lingers. However, Yusuf noticed the girl wasn't very excited after he had explained everything. Maybe there were better ways to restore this world. At last, the girl grinned and remarked, "It looks really cute." Her tone was gentle and earnest. She went on to say that she wanted to get 1 stick of gum for herself and another for Mira as a present. She gave 2 copper coins, each worth 10 lima, and 20 lima to the pastry chef. Yusuf took great pride in his initial profits. Yusuha received 2 copper coins, each worth 10, and 20 lim from the girl. He could hear them jingling as they landed in his palm. It was like music. A wave of pride swept over him, difficult to control. The first significant profit he made in the new world. The girl gripped her purchase as she said goodbye with a smile and nearly skipped off. Yusuf grinned after her, thinking that if he wanted to live comfortably in this new world, he had to keep up the same attitude. An energy and determination surged through him. But when the city streets reached midday, everything seemed to freeze and the streets lost their vibrancy. Slowly, Yusuf's hunger grew intolerable. His strength was failing him, and his stomach rumbled. He now had 20 lima in his pocket, but that didn't make the problem go away because he couldn't use that much money to buy even the most basic food. Only that one vivacious girl had purchased his wares all morning, and now the street was deserted once more. He started looking at his own goods. The curry rice crackers, which were warm, crisp, and aromatic, were especially alluring. They cost 20 lima, which was precisely how much he had. In addition to feeling hungry, Yusuf couldn't help but think that if he began eating his own goods, he wouldn't be a very successful businessman. His stomach growled loudly and insistently, and his head was spinning with weakness, making it impossible for him to think clearly. He was forced to. He had no choice but to eat. Yusuf grabbed a curry cracker without hesitation, brought it to his mouth with shaking hands, and took a bite. He was suddenly struck by the warmth in his chest and the spicy taste. Yusuha had eaten these same crackers when she was younger. They also warm you up a lot. He looked at the next thing. It cost 30 lima and was squid shashlik. Yusuf didn't even hesitate because it looked so good. He clearly relished every last morsel, relishing each bite. He discovered that squid shashlik had unique qualities in addition to being delicious. Yusuka was pretty sure that the product's quality was the reason it wasn't selling. Instead, a lack of advertising and his own lack of sales experience were the main causes. Yusuf heard several conversations coming from people on the street all of a sudden. He stood there listening, and his senses became acutely acute. He could not have predicted the strength of the enhanced senses he felt from the food. He was thrilled to discover that his product had provided him with an unanticipated benefit in addition to physical fulfillment. His ability to hear and comprehend those around him had significantly improved. He had an unexpected feeling all of a sudden. Even the dryness in his mouth had become more noticeable, Yusuf realized. From squid kebabs to curry crackers, every flavor seemed to be enhanced by a new level of sensitivity. At least he had located the water fountain fast enough, and for that he was thankful. The lion's head-shaped fountain was incredibly lovely, and the constant flow of water from its mouth produced a serene, almost mystical effect. He was somewhat relieved by the situation, and he happily drank some water. His attention was abruptly drawn to a plain building at the street's edge. Its facade was worn and it appeared unremarkable, as though it had not drawn notice in a long time. It seemed to Yusuka that it was most likely a hotel. When Yusuka got closer, he read the sign that said, Betakuro Safe Lodge. The name, even with the word, safe, sounded totally out of place in this rundown structure. He saw from the price tag that, even with his current 20 lima, it was still too costly for him. But based on the inn's appearance, it was the least expensive location he could locate. Yusuf sensed that night was approaching and knew that he would probably have to sleep outside tonight. After taking a quick look at the fading sun, he decided it would be best to head back to the dungeon in hopes of finding some small amount of cover. Suddenly, Yusuf questioned whether the girl who had purchased chewing gum from him today was doing all right. The girl who had purchased the gum and her friend Mira were in the dungeon at the same time. An elite slime of the rare class was standing directly in front of them. Any teen would find this creature to be a real challenge because it was nearly impervious to physical attacks and even more dangerous due to its resistance to magic. After closely examining the slime, Mira concluded that it would be far more challenging to combat than other creatures. Physical assaults could not overcome its resistance. She chose to incorporate magic after realizing this. The blade of the girl's sword, which she had purchased from Yusuf a few hours before, glowed with fire and was instantly covered in a magical sheath, ready for combat. She started to move toward the adversary. She made a strong triple shot on the first count. Sadly, on the second count, the girl who purchased the chewing gum misjudged the attack's trajectory, and the slime swiftly sidestepped and ducked. The girl became confused when she realized she had run out of magic units. She could no longer control her magic, and the slime was already planning a retaliation. Just then, Mira, who was standing close by, yelled at her that this was the exact reason she had warned her to exercise caution. Given the seriousness of the situation, Mira proposed using a potion to restore her magic power. However, the girl curtly responded that using a potion against slimes was shameful. After a moment of pondering, she realized that she had chewing gum, the very thing that gave her back her magic power. She recalled Yusuf stating that while the scent was strong, this gum replenished 6 units of magic power every minute. This was her opportunity, and she made the snap decision to seize this novel yet practical remedy. The girl immediately pulled out a piece of gum and pressed it into her mouth. It was a genuinely delightful taste that made her feel light and nostalgic. With every second that went by, she sensed her magical power returning and new energy bursting into her consciousness. After a few moments, the girl experienced a sudden surge of strength and clenched her fists, declaring with confidence that she was prepared to continue the fight. Her eyes gleamed with resolve, and her voice was firm. Standing beside her, Mira remained apprehensive. She found the rapid recovery suspicious. But unable to argue, she simply nodded when she saw her friend's self-assured smile. A fiery aura swirled around the girl's sword again as she raised it, gathering magical energy. With bursts of fire piercing the atmosphere, a strong triple shot blasted forward, aiming directly for the slug's heart. The city streets were now dark, with a gentle twilight covering everything. The pavement was covered in long shadows as the lanterns flickered. Yusuf watched the adventurers return from battle, their armor scratched, their faces exhausted but happy, as he stood at the dungeon's entrance. Suddenly, he heard a clear, ringing voice calling for his brother over the commotion. It was the girl who had pushed her friend Mira to move more quickly after buying him some gum earlier today. Mira couldn't figure out why the girl was rushing. When Yusuf saw a familiar face, he couldn't help but smile slightly and ask if she enjoyed the gum. The girl gave a joyful nod, her eyes practically glimmering with excitement. She started to explain how the gum had actually assisted her in regaining her magical energy when everything seemed lost, using gestures and sincere joy. She enthusiastically recalled the battle and showed how, with fire and resolve, she instantly executed her signature triple attack. The girl enthusiastically went on to explain that the gum's flavor was the only time the magical power restoration effect persisted. The effect vanished as soon as the scent did. She said that although the flavor of the gum was very pleasant, it was sadly short-lived. Still, it provided her with a much-needed tactical edge. She finished her tale, moved to the side, and gestured to her friend. It was Mira, her battle buddy. Mira smiled broadly and took a small piece of paper, neatly folded in half, out of her pocket. In front of Yusuha, she unfolded it to reveal the inscription in cheery, bright letters. "One more as a present." The note appeared to have been a part of a nostalgic lottery. After a moment of surprise, Yusuha realized that old Japanese candies did indeed contain surprises like this. He couldn't resist grinning as he ceremoniously gave the girl another piece of gum and congratulated her on her victory. The girl gasped in shock, not anticipating that it would be a genuine gift rather than merely a decoration. There was a flash of real admiration in her eyes. With a dramatic pout, the girl who had purchased some chewing gum that morning pretended to be unhappy. Her manner and expression were light-hearted, but there was a glimmer of jealousy in her eyes at her friend's success. Taking advantage of the situation, Yusuf stealthily took a new item out of his store, a chocolate coin that looked like the real thing and was wrapped in foil. Some physical strength was restored by the chocolate coin. 10 lira was its value. The coin itself was made of chocolate and looked similar to 10 lira. It was a typical lottery treat for him. The girl's eyes were brightly interested in the chocolate coin. The opportunity to win such a valuable treat, which she believed only the wealthy could afford, obviously astounded her. Her face was filled with sincere hope as she considered her chances of winning the lottery and obtaining the chocolate bar. Seizing the chance, Yusuf clarified that if she won, she would receive special points that could be redeemed for different bonuses down the road rather than the actual chocolate bar. These points are equivalent to the item's price and can be used in-store. The girl agreed right away and gave her money. She knelt down and started looking at the goods. Puzzled, Mira asked the girl what she was doing. In a brief response, she said she was making a decision. Yusuf referred to it as a waste of time, wearing the same doubtful expression as Mira. At last, with a hint of nervousness, the girl pointed resolutely to the coin that had captured her attention. Unfortunately, though, luck had run out. Seeing her friend's disappointment, Mira tried to console and support her by giving her a gentle hug. Motivated by her friend's enthusiasm, Mira also made the decision to play the lottery. Yusuf gave her the object while grinning a little. Fortune was on her side this time, and Mira found a 10 lira coupon. Yusuf clarified that she could now trade it in for anything up to 10 lira in value. Because of Mira's attractive appearance, the lottery loser exclaimed, pretending to be offended, that luck was always on her side. Such a thing was shameful, and she should be the one embarrassed, said Mira, who blushed a little. At that moment, Yusuf froze in complete bewilderment, not knowing how to respond. She had already paid 30 lire for 3 tickets, like a wind-up machine, but she was unlucky this time as well. Passing adventurers heard the girl's loud voice and came to ask her what was going on and why she was shouting so loudly. But they were her tickets, so the girl turned abruptly toward them and yelled at them to stay back while flushed with annoyance. A pushy girl who was already giving 30 lira for the next 3 items interrupted Yus as he was about to speak. Observing the scene, the adventurers discovered that the candies were inexpensive and thought the entire situation was charming. Everyone loved Yusuke's merchandise, and he was able to attract new clients. While some chose to buy chocolate and chewing gum, others chose to buy something else. Yusuke tried to project his best self as a salesman, was courteous, and wished them a good evening. The yells of Merle, Yusuke's sole client since the morning, became unanticipated yet remarkably successful promotion. People around her were drawn to her emotional outbursts and sincere joy, which generated excitement in the store. Yusuke was able to avoid sleeping on the streets because of this surge in popularity, which was fueled by just one customer. The money he made that day was sufficient to pay for a roof over his head. At last, Merle produced the much-coveted 30 lira coupon. She practically glowed with delight as a bright smile spread across her face, and she held the coupon in her hands as if it were the biggest win of the day. As Yusa watched the girl smile while holding the coupon, he graciously congratulated her. But he couldn't help but think that Merle had spent a lot more money than she had won. A faint, barely perceptible tap on her shoulder broke the train of thought. Behind her, there was a voice asking her to turn around. As she watched her friend eagerly inspect her purchases, Mira proposed that they go back to the store the following day. Merle, who wasn't used to such stores grabbing her attention so strongly, turned to her and asked if she was serious. Understanding that her offer might be interpreted in an ambiguous way, Mira hurried to clarify, attempting to use softer language to avoid giving her friend any unwarranted thought. Merle replied that they would definitely return. They said goodbye to Yus loudly and promised to be back tomorrow. The girls grinned as they went. After responding that he would wait, Yus was pleased to see that his store appeared to be attracting its first loyal customers. His new business got off to a promising start. Merle made the decision to find out the name of the store before he left for good. Yusuke became aware that he had yet to name his company. It was a startling turn of events, but he decided he had to figure it out fast. In honor of himself, he named his store Yahagi's Pastry Shop. Since he was the one who started this small business from the ground up, this choice seemed reasonable and even a little proud. Perplexed, Merle repeated the name as though to inquire what it meant. In his introduction, Yusuke Yahagi stated that he chose the name in honor of himself, and that it was his personal name. When the girl heard this, she said that the title and the name were really pretty strange. Mira called out to Yusuke Yahagi in embarrassment, as she flushed. Meanwhile, Merle started to believe that Yusa was just the kind of person she was looking for, different, strange, and attractive. She was struck by his tone of voice and the modesty with which he presented himself and his store. The explorers started sharing news and impressions as they talked about the day's activities. Merle was informed by one of their squads that they had at last located the witch they had been looking for a long time. Intrigued by the discussion, Yusa came up and inquired as to who they had located. Observing his interest, Mira clarified that the king was cursed by the witch in question. The adventurers went on to talk about the reward for capturing the witch, and it was revealed that the person who found her would receive 100 million lire. When Yusa heard this amount, he was unable to control his surprise. In an attempt to comprehend what he had just heard, he opened his mouth. Mira went on to say that the witch had eluded the traps set by numerous adventurers who had been looking for her for a long time, and that no one had been able to apprehend her. When Yusa heard this, he felt ashamed. He cautiously added that he was only a pastry chef and that such a mission was obviously not for him, lowering his gaze a little and tempering his enthusiasm. Posing in a haughty manner, Merle firmly stated that she would one day be the recipient of this honor. Mira smiled and said that this story didn't relate to them because they were fighting slugs, which was a totally different kind of work. After listening in on their conversation, Yus added that a consistent source of income was always preferable. Yusuke thought at the time that there was nothing in common, but life can be different. Either your occupation or those in your immediate vicinity. All of the merchants had already set up shop in the morning, right before the dungeon entrance, yelling out opening announcements and calling out to adventurers to come to their stalls. There was a sense of hope and lively commerce, as well as the expectation of a new day. Yusa smiled as he welcomed Merle and Mira, his first regular customers, after arranging all the merchandise on the counter. Merle wasted no time in ordering 3 gumballs at once, but Mira took the largest candy after giving it some more thought. That morning, Yusuke had spent 500 lira on a towel for himself. At this point, he had 420 lira remaining. Since the exchange rate was 1-to-1, he had precisely 420 yen in his possession when converted to yen. Following his rebirth, Yusuke was able to open his own store, which was his first significant accomplishment. Despite numerous unforeseen and difficult circumstances, he survived until his second day in the new world, feeling a little excited and like he was starting a real life as he stood on the precipice of new opportunities. Early on in his journey, Yusuke was surprised and delighted to learn that two girls, Merle and Mira, were his first regular customers. When they came back to his counter in the morning rush, Mira abruptly inquired as to whether he was a magician. With a faint smile, Yusuke acknowledged that the only spell he was familiar with was opening, a straightforward spell for starting a store. Mira let out a sigh. The ability to use opening is a rare form of spatial magic, Mira explained, smiling slightly. Even though they appeared straightforward at first, she added, not everyone was able to control such powers. Merle happily interrupted, exclaiming that she wanted something for 10 lira and as soon as possible. The shop had a lively, almost festive atmosphere because of her impatience and sparkling eyes, which made people smile. The girls eventually saw that Yusuke appeared pale and exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot from sleep deprivation, and he moved slowly. With a strained smile, he handed Merle 3 pieces of gum and calmly explained that he hadn't slept well the night before. He made an effort to uphold his morals while tending to his first and most devoted clients, even though he was exhausted. Merle continued to run quickly and energetically, yelling goodbye to Yusuke and promising to see her again. More subdued, Mira bowed serenely and assured him they would be back soon. Merle, looking back, yelled that Yusuke's wish for their safe return sounded too pessimistic as he watched them leave. Still, he stayed at his counter, cleaning up the candy again, and both girls walked out smiling. These girls helped Yusuke attract even more loyal customers. He smiled warmly at each of them, attempting to commit their faces and tastes to memory. Upon approaching the counter, one of the adventurers inquired if curry rice crackers were available. He clarified that prior to their dungeon adventure, his friends wanted to bring some with them. But eventually, Yusuke came to the realization that dagashi would not be a quick source of income. He took 360 lira in the morning. Yusuke was able to spend the night in that inexpensive house with that money. At the moment, he had 780 lira in his possession. When he got close to Badakuro's cheap house last night, Yusuke noticed that it looked really eerie in the dark. Would he even be able to escape alive by morning? Yusuke entered and noticed a very irate and unhappy woman working the reception desk. She looked like a bore, he thought to himself. He was informed that the cost, including breakfast, would be 850 lira after declaring his plan to stay for one night. The woman led him to his room and threatened to expel him if he didn't keep quiet that night. Yusuke was forced to concur. The room was tiny, barely larger than a closet, but it contained everything essential: a narrow bed, an old nightstand, and a lamp that gleamed sadly on its surface. Despite its small size, the room had an odd, almost cozy vibe. Not hiding her annoyance, the woman slammed the door with demonstrative rudeness, as if locking Yusuke in this corner until morning, and said over her shoulder that the lamp's magic crystal would only last 2 hours. She also added that there was no need to let her know that she was leaving. Yusuke lay down in bed with relief, letting himself a faint smile, thinking that all he needed to do in the morning was gather his belongings and go quietly. But there was a problem. An icy hand slowly squeezing his back caused a chill to creep through the blanket. Just a moment ago, the room had felt comfortable, but now it felt like a frozen cave, and Yusuke started to shiver, wondering how anyone could sleep in such a place. Yusuke felt the chill and draft even beneath the blanket. At this point, the weather here appeared to be nearly identical to that of early spring in Japan. Still, he tried to tell himself, it was better than sleeping out. But he couldn't shake the thought. What if the world is experiencing warm weather? It might not be the worst thing to spend the night in a place that is a veritable nightmare during the winter months. He felt even more exhausted than the previous night, and still hadn't slept well the following morning. He initially believed that he needed to start saving money in order to buy a home or, at the very least, a better place where he could unwind. It was now evening, when explorers start to come out of the dungeons. Mira and Merle, 2 of Yusuke's acquaintances, appeared incredibly worn out and exhausted, as though they had fought an unfair battle with the world all day. Yusa asked the girls what had happened after giving them a worried look. With a weary sigh, Mira explained that she had been cursed with a persistent dizziness and that Merle had fallen into a dangerous trap in the dungeon. The return had turned into a real test, and their strength was ebbing. Breathing heavily, Merle started to describe what had transpired. She had accidentally touched a gargoyle statue once in the dungeon. This turned out to be a deadly error. Her head hurt so badly that she could hardly stand, but it wasn't deadly. The sensation that her mind was being ripped apart only grew stronger with each movement. Yusa asked the girls if they had water and cups after giving them a worried look. Mira grinned in response to his inquiry, but it was clear from her doubtful look that she wasn't totally sure she needed the assistance he was referring to. She inquired, somewhat ironically, if he had an antidote. Yusa said, a little hesitantly, that it was more of a juice than an antidote. A 30 lira powdered juice with a grape flavor. According to him, its unique quality was that, once dissolved in 120 milliliters of water, it started to disperse throughout the drinker, relieving headaches and tension. Merle, who was leaning against the wall behind his shop and appeared exhausted, was given the glass of juice that Yusa had prepared with care. In the hopes that it would provide her with some respite, he carefully assisted her in drinking, holding the glass so she could easily sip. Then Merle leaped to her feet, a smile spreading across her face and her eyes gleaming. She raved about how good it was and hurried to see if he had any more. Yusa took a step forward and fixed his eyes on Merle, who now had a much better appearance. Her expression had softened, and her complexion had grown warm and natural. With a faint sense of relief that he could now be certain the girl would be all right, he said. Merle appeared somewhat surprised by his proximity. Her cheeks reddened and she averted her gaze shyly. Mira showed up out of nowhere and commented curiously that the effect was very impressive. Curious, she perused the drink's packaging and noted the 5 flavors: pineapple for 15 minutes, melon for 40 minutes of increased experience, orange for detoxification, strawberry for lowering magical energy consumption, and grape for dispelling. She was as surprised as he was to learn that every flavor did, in fact, have a distinct effect, as Yusa smiled and confirmed. Incredulous, the girls hurried to choose the juices that immediately drew their attention. With gleeful eyes, Merle snatched up every pineapple one, sure of its health benefits. After considering her options, Mira selected 3 orange and 3 grape juices. In addition, Merle, seemingly giving in to temptation, believed that a dozen chocolate lottery tickets would make her day. It was difficult to accept that she had been under a curse only a moment before. Merle's loud cries soon reached all the adventurers in the vicinity. She had lost the lottery once more. She was at it again, and some people smirked and sighed. Everyone knew Merle wouldn't settle down so quickly. Some attempted to talk her out of it by suggesting that she give up this obsession, but the girl refused to listen and kept saying it. As she watched, Yusa started to question whether she had overblown this concept. She wanted to keep trying until she won, Merle cried out. That's the way she fights. It all came as a surprise. The sound caused Merle to turn, but before she could blink, someone yelled, "Hold it!" and then suddenly thrust an odd object into her mouth. It was too late for her to pull away. Merle let out a cry as she felt the unidentified material start to dissolve on her tongue right away. She was initially anxious because she didn't know what had happened or what had been forced upon her. But eventually comprehension set in, and she started to feel much better. Startled, she inquired what it was. In an attempt to seem unconcerned, Yusa responded that it was a calming cola that relieves stress and helps one think clearly. With a faint smile, Mira advised her to always have a can of Coke on hand for Merle, just in case it would be more convenient. Taking advantage of the situation, Yusa reminded Merle that she was due 40 lira. He considered his sales of 3,000 lira that day to be a true success. Yusuke was able to return to the same inexpensive home today. When he entered, the standard question was asked if he wanted to stay the night. The woman behind the counter told him that he would be given the same room as yesterday when he responded that he needed one. The landlady was the same, Yusuke thought to himself, with the same gloomy face and heavy eyes. He thought it was simply dirt when he caught a glimpse of a dark patch on the counter. But the woman saw right away that he had noticed the spot and looked at him. Declaring that it was only a fight, she gave Yusuke a menacing glare. She went on to say that she was more than capable of correcting anyone. Her icy words and dark eyes made Yusuke choke with fear. He was more convinced than ever that he had to find a better place to stay the night as soon as possible, one that was free of stains and frightful old women. Yusuke chose to take a position nearer the dungeon entrance after waking up earlier than normal. He was aware that there was more traffic there, which increased the likelihood of a healthy profit. There was only one thing on his mind: how to make quick cash for a better night's stay away from the squalid owner and the soiled remnants of previous fights. After casting the opening spell, Yusuke was intrigued to see that the pineapple juice, which had sold out so fast the day before, was now available again. The remaining merchandise, which had also been on the verge of being sold out the previous day, was now fully stocked. Yusuke looked at the shelves in wonder, wondering if they were really replenishing themselves. There were also new products on the shelves, including a disposable rocket. This package exploded when thrown at a monster, and the effect was amplified when several rockets were used at once. As if nothing had ever vanished, the lottery machine was also fully loaded once more. Yusuke was taken aback. The power of explosions. He vividly recalled how rockets in Japan would just pop and make a loud noise, eliciting only astonishment or delight. This was a real weapon, though. He questioned whether a candy store should sell such a hazardous product. Merle had already come to the counter with Mira while he was thinking about this. When Merle saw that pineapple juice was once again available, he was thrilled and prepared to purchase the entire supply. Then she noticed the new object in Yusuke's hands. Yusuke made the decision to question Mira about the potential dangers of explosion magic. "It all depends on the caster," she said calmly. It was a very effective weapon in battle when used by skilled combatants. She added that she was unable to use it for herself. Yusuke hesitated because he wasn't entirely sure how it all operated. Offering to test the new product, he turned to Merle. She gave it some thought before reluctantly stating that she would only drink the juice but that she might risk purchasing a trial batch for herself. With a faint smile, he said that he was sure the girls would enjoy the 3 little Class 3 rockets he had packed for them. But even as he watched them go, Yusuke cautioned them against using them carelessly. The girls merely waved their hands and assuredly responded that he shouldn't be concerned because they were familiar with using and handling magical objects. When the girls got back to the city that evening, they went straight to Yahagi's candy store. Merle's eagerness surprised Yusuke a little. She jumped at him, shouting with delight that she and Mira had earned a lot more than usual and that the pineapple juice was just wonderful. Although both girls appeared exhausted, their contented looks indicated that the day had been filled with many positive experiences. Merle enthusiastically described how the missiles had simply blown her mind as they started exchanging impressions. She couldn't conceal her admiration for the monster, which was by no means weak, but had been destroyed in a single blow. Now Merle wanted to give the rockets a try. Anyone could use these gadgets, which were straightforward and useful while having the same power as the magic employed by seasoned explorers. Yusuke believed that this product was ideal for novices and that it only cost 50 lira. Merle made the decision to play the daily lottery once more. Even though she only won 5 lira this time, it was still a step closer to the prize she had been hoping for. Since it had evolved from a pastime to a genuine way of life for her, she fervently declared that she would not give up until she succeeded. As her friends noticed her enthusiasm, they started giving her Coke cans in the hopes that the beverage would at least lessen her fervor and assist her in relaxing. So Yusuke was back in that horrible house, trying to find a room. The elderly woman gave him a glum greeting, clearly irritated. Even though he knew it wasn't the ideal choice for a vacation, he had still only intended to stay for one night. He had returned to this low-cost establishment not so much because he wanted to save money as because he realized that he still needed to watch how much he spent, even with the rise in sales. The elderly woman then offered him a 5-night stay with a rate reduction. Though he couldn't agree, Yusuke thought she had softened a bit. 5 nights in a row here was obviously not his thing, but he still intended to find somewhere better. The elderly woman, however, remained unfazed and kept alerting Yusuke to the fact that a dangerous man had stopped close to his room that day. She warned him to exercise caution because this man might be dangerous. Such warnings didn't seem like a coincidence, so Yusuke hesitated. Yusuke made the decision to find out if the man they were describing to him was indeed a bandit. That wasn't quite true, the elderly woman said. The old woman went on to say that this man was known as the Dark Priest and that there were rumors that he had committed numerous murders. The mere mention of this made Yusuke uncomfortable. Already, he was picturing sinister activities associated with this man. He hoped that he would not run into this frightful man. Tormented by curiosity, Yus asked why such a dangerous man had not been arrested by the guards. The elderly woman asked if he really didn't know, her eyes narrowing in surprise. Persuaded by his lack of knowledge, she told him to wait, while she brewed tea and explained that the story was lengthy. Reluctantly, the young man nodded, and as the woman went into the kitchen, it occurred to him that maybe this stern woman was just lonely. Yus thought it would be courteous to offer something sweet to accompany the tea since the elderly woman was going to brew it. He opened his shop and took out a package of chocolate dorayaki. There were 2 in each, and based on their magical qualities, the second dorayaki was to be given to the person sitting next to you, signifying the bolstering of trust and friendship. Yusa was hesitant to approach this severe woman. He learned from his experience that Dagashi's impact typically matched its cost, so he shouldn't anticipate a lot of intimacy. But he decided he could try to make contact even with such a formidable old woman. He set the package on the table, keeping these things in mind. When the elderly woman came back and offered her one of the dogashi, he opened the package. They were the candies he sold, he said. She asked if he sold them after tasting one of his hands and declaring it to be delicious. The elderly woman inquired about the price he was charging for the candies after examining the packaging with curiosity. She snorted and said she'd take 10 at a time when she heard how inexpensive they were. Yusuka was a little surprised because, strangely enough, this awkward conversation led to another sale. Yusuka took the mug and thought the tea tasted like a hybrid of black tea and hojicha. Choosing to continue where they had left off, he did so. Why weren't law enforcement officials prosecuting offenders? With a sidelong glance, the elderly woman started her story. All the best generals and warriors have been sent to the border, she said. Only pathetic remnants of forces that couldn't even defend themselves were left in the capital. She was enjoying her dorayaki so much that Yusuha couldn't help but notice. At this pace, he was even a little nervous, fearing that they might soon get much closer than he had preferred. Maybe he should cut back on the candy a little. With a heavy sigh, the elderly woman informed Yusuha that the nation had been at war for a very long time. What was left could scarcely be described as an army, for all the best generals and warriors had been sent to the border. Yusuha fought to keep his composure. He really had no idea of this, since his life had only just begun. Yusuha instantly recalled Mira and Merle discussing the witch's curse earlier when the elderly woman also brought up the royal curse. They appeared to be the same thing. Michelle, a strong and well-known witch, was the king's former fiancée. Their union was regarded as a powerful and wise alliance, but all of a sudden, it was terminated. Questions raced through Yusu's mind as he tried to figure out how this could have happened. As it happened, the reason for the split was straightforward and unremarkable. The king had developed feelings for a different woman, the one who was now queen. Yusuha was truly taken aback by this. Instead of the political games, intrigue, or dark magic he had anticipated, he was given a tale about human frailty and the erratic nature of the heart. Any spell didn't seem nearly as cruel or painful as this turn of events. The old woman claimed that the king had been influenced by the queen's allure because of her captivating beauty. She brushed the story aside with contempt, calling the king a mere man influenced by appearances. The old woman smiled wryly and confirmed that it all started when Yusa suggested that the witch, humiliated and abandoned, had cast a curse in retaliation. Safety had declined and the city's security had weakened since the king retired from state affairs. Rumor alone no longer scared the guards, and they no longer dared to interact with dangerous criminals. Yusa reasoned that Michelle must have been both a strong witch and attractive if the king had ever planned to wed her. As though someone invisible had come down the steps, a sudden, heavy, almost physical energy swept down the stairwell, leaving a trail of tension and cold in their wake. Yusa shuddered. He felt something dark, restless, and alien in the air. The elderly woman narrowed her eyes, scowled, and glanced anxiously up at the stairs. She cautioned Yusuka that such remarks were serious in a reserved tone. Disobeying the royal family was equivalent to signing your own death warrant, even though criminals might be freed. You might end up in jail for being so obstinate, and you wouldn't be saved by any connections. Yusa turned around because he thought he felt someone following him up the stairs, but no one was there. As though someone was listening in, Yusa turned to the elderly woman and haltingly explained that he had heard an odd noise coming from the stairs. Uneasy, he looked around the room anxiously. As she watched him closely, the elderly woman narrowed her eyes and asked, somewhat mockingly, if he had been listening to her story at all or if he had already started to see the shadows of fear. With a sigh, the elderly woman concluded that, In the end, she didn't give a damn about her guests' identities as long as they made their payments on schedule. But she warned Yusuke to be on the lookout because the gloomy priest who lived next door might be more than just odd, he might even be dangerous. The night grew dark and nearly silent. After settling into his groaning bed, Yusuke rolled around under the thin blanket for a long time. He was troubled by his thoughts. Every creak of the floor and every rustle behind the wall seemed sinister. He was disappointed to learn that he was unlikely to get any sleep tonight. With his heart pounding more rapidly than normal, Yusuke sat up in bed. The sense of being watched from the shadows persisted. His mind whirled restlessly with the idea of the gloomy priest remaining in the adjacent room. What if, in fact, he recognized his danger? Someone like him could easily be regarded with suspicion in this world where charges could be whispered and punishments executed in secret. It appeared that the wall between him and the possible murderer was dangerously thin. And as though to make fun of his anxieties, Yusuke had a sudden, intense urge to urinate. Cursing his body for the ill-timed moment, he clenched his teeth and stared at the ceiling. However, the stairs were right across from the gloomy priest's room, and the restroom was in the courtyard. Yusuke pondered whether need or fear would kill him first as he sat on his bed and gazed into the night. He sensed a tragicomedy looming over him. He might die from a simple urge to use the restroom rather than from a magical explosion. Then something inside of him clicked. If death was inevitable, let him pass away with honor rather than as a pathetic shadow. As Yusuke entered the dark hallway, he saw right away that the door to the room next to it, where the gloomy priest lived, was open. Like an alarm drum, his heart thumped in his chest. His whole body tensed as he froze in place. Was that dangerous neighbor awake? Yusuke had the perilous idea to peek through the partially open door and see what was going on in the shadowy priest's chamber. He couldn't help but be curious, even though he knew it could end badly. There was something in this forbidden moment that drew him in stronger than reason. But what he saw was entirely different from what he had anticipated. There was a set of beautiful lingerie on the next room's well-made bed. The object didn't fit Yusuke's image of a grim priest, and he stood frozen in place, unable to take his eyes off it. The first thought that came to him was that the brow was obviously too big. In an attempt to ignore the odd ideas that were beginning to creep into his mind, Yusuke shook his head. He made himself stop thinking about the panties he had found in the adjacent room. As though the man were a lingerie designer or had some weird pastime, his mind searched for an explanation. But it seemed more ridiculous the more he considered it. His mind kept racing with the idea that there was more going on here, something sinister and perilous. After inhaling deeply, Yusuke concluded that it would be best to ignore what he had just witnessed. Yusuke, relieved to be outside at last, went to the bathroom. The night's tension had been eased, and he felt the tension subside after completing all the necessary tasks. Yusuke needed to regain his composure after everything that had transpired during the course of the previous night. On his way back to his room after going outside to relieve himself, he became aware that his stomach was obviously in need of some attention. He joyfully opened the dorayaki package and took one, enjoying the momentary relief that the warm, soft bean paste cake offered. Yusuke had just started to savor the chocolate dorayaki, the sweet paste melting in his mouth, when he heard a sharp, disagreeable voice. Before Yusuke, looming over him and obscured by the shadows, was a figure. The man's bulky armor glinted frighteningly in the dim light coming from the window. Every step he took had a dull thud, like metal scraping against stone, and his silhouette was huge and menacing. Although his face was concealed by a mask, it was immediately clear that this was no normal man from the brilliantly glowing, icy eyes. He was certain that the death with the scythe was right in front of him. Yusuke started to clarify that he was merely a street vendor, but the armored figure in front of him saw the candies and interrupted him. Yusuke, still paralyzed by fear, trembled and held out a dorayaki to the armored man in front of him. His heart tightened with fear. He didn't give a candy to someone who appeared to be the very embodiment of death very often. Sharing a candy with a potential death god at this moment seemed both ridiculous and terrifyingly real. He might, however, be a regular individual. Yusuke made an effort to persuade himself that the person behind the intimidating exterior was just frightful. Maybe he wouldn't be killed for a single dorayaki. A thin, ringing, distinctly feminine voice suddenly emerged from beneath the heavy mask and declared, with surprising warmth, that it was very tasty. He was pretty sure he had just heard a woman's voice from under the helmet. When asked if all of the items on the counter were candy, Yusuke nodded. With evident interest, the knight calmly pointed to a number of the treats, after slowly going over the assortment. When Yusuha asked the knight if he liked sweets, he replied that he didn't, after he had accumulated an armful of them and found it difficult to hold them in both hands. Yusuha was asked if he lived at the hotel after he sold something for 1,000 lira. To be honest, he said that he occasionally stayed there. After a brief farewell from the knight, Yusuha felt relieved and decided it was time to head back to his room. He was relieved that the deal had been finalized and that everything had gone smoothly. Back in her room, the girl sat by herself, grinning, going through the candy she had purchased. She was gratified that she had made the decision to speak with Yusuha at last. She felt alone after a long day, and a simple conversation brought a small smile to her eyes. She was pleased with the result even though she wasn't sure if it was fate. In his room, Yusufa lay beneath the blanket, shaky with fear. He was constantly thinking about surviving, and every shadow in the corner appeared to be a danger. He was aware that he needed to live. When morning came again, Yusufa was opening his pastry shop as usual. Today, though, he noticed something odd right away. His shop had changed. As he gazed around in awe, he came to the conclusion that the shop's success seemed to change it. It got better the more sales it generated. The store looked more orderly and appealing since Yusufa could now proudly display his goods in tidy wooden boxes. He also saw that there was a wider choice. There were now new drinks, candies, and even some uncommon treats that weren't previously offered. Now Yusuha sold chips with a hint of salt. A monster's image appeared on a magic card inside each bag, which you could use to temporarily call the creature to your side. These cards were particularly helpful when fighting or finishing risky tasks. The fact that each buyer had a slim but genuine chance of obtaining a rare card that called forth an SSS rank monster was especially intriguing. Merle and Mira were among the first to arrive at the store, as usual. The new products, neatly arranged in brand new wooden crates, immediately caught their attention. With a faint smile, Yusufa presented the new offering to them, monster cards and mildly salted chips. He had just completed his explanation when the girls all shouted together that they would definitely give them a try. An A-rank stone golem, a huge being that resembled a living statue of gray-brown stone, was one of the cards that Mira was given. Each muscle appeared to have been cut from a single block, and it was 2.5 meters tall. In spite of its low status, the golem was respected. Mira smiled broadly. The discovery of the stone golem was fantastic. Because of its adaptability, it could be employed as a potent offensive force as well as a living shield for defense. Plans for where and how to test it out were already in the works. Curiosity got the better of Yusuha, who looked curiously at the card Merle had been given. With a pout, she showed the outcome, regular slime. With a regretful sigh, Merle rolled her eyes and realized that her luck had run out once more. After having a brilliant idea, Yusuha went to Mira and offered her a part-time position. He gave her an apricot stick, one of his new creations. The product was straightforward but unique. Thin apricot slices frozen in sweet syrup, packaged in a clear, popsicle-shaped bag. In addition to being delicious, the stick had a magical effect that gave its eater a momentary boost in bravery. He requested that Mira immediately freeze the contents using her ice magic. Mira apologized to Yusuha, feeling a little ashamed. She didn't have ice magic, it turned out. Despite his disappointment, Yusuha nodded in understanding. He was certain that the taste would have been similar to actual fruit sherbet if the stick had frozen instantly. A familiar, menacing voice interrupted his thoughts from behind him. It sounded muffled, as though it were coming from behind a mask, and it suggested the same icy, nearly lethal silence that Yusuha had heard the previous evening. He turned to see a tall, black-armored knight. The same person who the day before had purchased sweets worth 1,000 lira. The sight of a knight in black armor startled Yusuha, who tensed at once. He instinctively positioned himself in front of Merle and Mira, protecting them, as though he was afraid the enigmatic stranger would threaten them. He smiled tensely, though, and greeted the new customer politely, trying not to show his discomfort. Seemingly oblivious to his suspicion, the knight asked coolly what sort of ice magic help was needed. After hesitating for a moment, Yusufa waved his hand and declared that it made no difference, and that he would not be able to afford such a service anyhow. But the knight firmly asserted that he didn't require money, shaking his head. Without further delay, he lifted his hand the next moment, and a gentle stream of chilly air swept across the counter. The apricot sticks immediately developed a thin layer of frost and froze to perfection. Yusuf watched with relief as the knight froze the apricot sticks with ice magic. He started to believe that this man might not be as frightening as he had initially believed. Although the knight was taciturn, it appeared that he had no plans to attack or threaten. In an attempt to build some trust, Yusuf chose to offer him one of the frozen sticks. Yusuf saw the knight walking determinedly to buy 10 apricot sticks at the counter. He was taken aback because Yusuf hadn't anticipated this enigmatic man would show such interest. Everyone else felt uneasy because of the knight's intimidating aura, despite the fact that he was straightforward and honest in his purchases. Yusuf couldn't help but wonder if what they were saying about him was true when the knight left the store. Hoping for an explanation, he asked his friends. Merle clarified that she had seen a man murder people in his group. Mira, who always tried to maintain her composure, went on to say that she had been deeply impacted by the story of a knight who killed 10 people at once. Merle went on to explain that in addition to being a skilled swordsman, the knight was also able to perform amazing feats. She remembered how, in one instance, he stunned everyone by slicing a 2-meter-long snake into pieces with a single blow. But she also mentioned that he was a master of second-tier magic in addition to physical prowess. Given that this level of magic is thought to be extremely rare and challenging to master, this was an especially astounding sight. Unable to control himself, Yusuf blurted out that he didn't understand why a man with his strength and ability was in such a weak dungeon. Merle was taken aback by this, and Mira was silent for a while, as though she was thinking about what he had said. Eventually, Merle and Mira rushed off, the gloomy atmosphere created by the knight's visit still weighing heavily on them. Yusuf stayed at the store, a little bewildered. He had no idea that the Grim Reaper would ever show up, much less become a frequent client. When the apricot sticks melted that same evening, Yusuf simply sighed and chose not to be upset because there were hardly any customers at the time, so he did not incur any sizable losses. Michelle abruptly came to the store and asked Yusuf for another rocket while grinning a little. She noted that there weren't many customers today and explained that people were scared to leave their houses because a witch had been spotted close by. She also revealed that she had 1/3 place at his store, to which Yusuf gave her his heartfelt congratulations. He was thrilled that his store was making money while also making people happy. Michelle smiled and inquired as to how she could obtain the monster chips that she had seen on Merle earlier in the day. Without any delay, Yusuf retrieved a fresh box of mildly salted chips, the ones that held the monster trading cards, from beneath the counter. Yusuf eventually came to the realization that he was receiving all of his goods for free, so he was spared the trouble of making purchases or spending money. Even so, selling candy was a little exhausting, especially with all the odd customers that came into his store. He wasn't deterred though, because if sales kept up their current pace, he would be able to afford a much safer and more comfortable place to spend the night this week. A somber priest suddenly materialized close to the pastry shop. Yusuf gave him a terrified greeting. Yusuf's address startled the grim priest, who started to introduce himself but stopped. The gloomy priest finally introduced himself as Manurva. He then indicated that he wanted to purchase an orange juice bottle by silently pointing to it on the counter. His voice sounded odd, so Yusuke worriedly asked if his customer had been poisoned. His mind instantly conjured up a vision of a severely scarred face concealed beneath a hood. He carefully served the drink to his sullen client after quietly pouring orange juice powder into a mug so as to avoid asking needless questions. Minerva cautiously took several sips of orange juice after removing his mask, exposing only a portion of his face. Yusuf, who was observing him anxiously, inquired as to whether the drink was assisting and got a hushed response. He did notice, though, that his voice was a little higher pitched than before. The grim priest assured him briefly that he need not worry about him and that he would certainly come back without waiting for more questions. After saying this, he slowly left. Minerva sounded like a girl's name, so Yusuf couldn't help but wonder after she left. He was unsure whether he should even ask such questions, or how unusual it was for this world. A new object that had just appeared on the counter diverted his attention from his thoughts. Yusuke studied the new product, a stretch card, closely. Because it provided access to one of the stats based on a random selection on the card, it was unique. The most fascinating aspect, though, was that the card had a 12-hour expiration date, which created a sense of excitement and urgency. Customers found the product even more enticing because it came with a piece of chewing gum as an extra bonus. Yusuf was confident that the new product would be particularly well liked by risk-takers and those who enjoyed the unexpected. With a hint of nostalgia, He thought back to his previous residence in Japan, which was always full of exciting little things that made people want to have fun. As he considered this, a new client came to his bakery. It was Garm, a young explorer who was well known in the community. His favorite curry rice balls were the reason he had come. As a frequent patron, Garm had frequently assisted in introducing other explorers to his establishment. He was treated with warmth by Yusa, who thought he was a decent, trustworthy man who was easy to get along with. Garm presented Regal, a youthful explorer, as his new teammate. In a friendly reply, Yusa said he hoped he would find something he liked. Regal, feeling a little ashamed, acknowledged that he was new, but he had heard that the bakery sold a number of practical things for just 10 lira. Yusa excitedly showed off the assortment. His store was a real gem for novices, offering cheap supplies that, although basic, could occasionally save lives. Merle was ecstatic to see the rapidly growing assortment of confections when she stopped by the store that morning. It seemed like you could find anything in this confectionery store, from practical trinkets to genuinely uncommon finds, as the shelves became more varied every day. Stretch cards, the new product, were enthusiastically introduced by Yusuke. He clarified that in order to take part, you must use a coin to scratch the protective layer and observe the outcome. You win if 3 identical symbols line up. Many customers were immediately drawn to the idea, particularly those who enjoy taking chances. Merle, who is well known for her love of gambling, offered to try it first. Yusuke advised her to start with a can of Coke. Therefore, when they saw identical images on the first 2 sectors, a number of adventurers who had made the decision to try their luck with stretch cards froze in suspense. Scratching off the final piece made the possibility of winning a bonus practically real. The air was heavy with excitement and anticipation, and the crowd drew nearer, observing each flip of the coin. But Yusuke, who was behind the counter wearing his trademark half-smile, was aware that winning was not a given when 2 symbols matched. This was exactly the type of calculation that is frequently employed in marketing to generate excitement and a sense of impending victory. After erasing the final portion of his stretch map, one of the adventurers abruptly stopped when a bright light flashed in front of his eyes. The symbols on the map were the same in all 3 sections. The paper exploded with light that illuminated the surrounding area and caused the gathered group to exclaim in surprise. Still in disbelief at what was happening, the adventurer clenched his fist in admiration and said he could already feel the power suffusing his body. Remaining calm, Yusuha reminded him that the enhancement effect was only good for 12 hours and that he should rush to the dungeon while the power was still there to maximize its effects. Yusuha went up to Merle, who had a distressed expression on her face as she studied her stretch card. 3 distinct images with no possibility of strengthening were far from what she had anticipated. Merle referred to herself as a loser and muttered sadly that it appeared she had been unlucky once more. Seeing her disappointment, Yusuha made an effort to lift her spirits. Not wanting to give up so easily, Merle reached for a fresh batch of stretch cards in a true rush of excitement. Yusuha, with a slight grin and a skeptical expression, wished her luck, not particularly believing in her chances but not hindering her determination. Mira sighed and gave her a bottle of Coke while she watched her friend. Merle abruptly declared that it appeared that there was a witch in the dungeon's lower levels. She was more and more keen to hone her skills before going down there. Mira confirmed that they were unlikely to handle such a threat at their current level by nodding worriedly. Yusuf listened to their conversation in shock, only now realizing that he had been caught completely off guard by the news that a witch had indeed shown up in the dungeon. Speaking of the place where the witch had been seen, Yusuf couldn't help but be curious. He had been informed by Merle and Mira that she had been spotted on the 3rd floor of the dungeon, where she had shot multiple adventurers with a poisoned arrow before running away. Yusuf thought about this, attempting to determine the exact time of the attack and how long the story had been told. Inquiringly, Yus asked Merle and Mira if they were familiar with the witch's appearance. They nodded right away and explained that it was now simple to identify her because her wanted portraits were displayed outside the castle. In addition, a unique insect that resembled a mosquito lived in the dungeon and started to make a high-pitched noise whenever the witch was in close proximity. An enthusiastic mob rushed up to the candy store at that precise moment. People shouted and asked if it was true that Garm had bought his purchases there, and they talked excitedly about cola candies and stretch cards. Yusuf couldn't help but smile because he felt his business was really expanding and the new wave of customers, brought in by Garm, had brought life to his shop. Yusuke was certain that he would soon be able to support himself solely on the money he made from his pastry shop as he sold one item after another. This belief was further supported by the surge of customers brought about by the new product's popularity and positive reviews. After the morning rush, he estimated in his mind that if things kept going this way, he would have enough money to go shopping and buy everything he needed. In the end, Yusuke purchased a spacious leather backpack, the kind that adventurers usually use. He needed to be ready for anything because he knew he couldn't keep the shop open all the time. The nights in Batakuro could be extremely cold, so he packed the backpack with the bare necessities, including a cheap but cozy blanket he had purchased at a thrift shop. He then treated himself to a little comfort, spending 350 lira on a big, aromatic sausage and 150 lira on hot vegetable soup. Yusuf could finally afford everything he needed and eat a healthy breakfast now that he had a little extra cash in his pocket. Even though he had already spent the majority of his daily budget on his backpack, he still had 3,000 lira left over, which gave him the confidence to stop worrying about the small things. Yusuf's stroll grew longer that night, and he ended up in the square in front of the royal palace. Compared to the busy square in front of the dungeon, this area was spacious and well maintained. It was quieter, cleaner, and brighter. Yusuf looked around, trying to find the notice board, and eventually found it at the back of the square, close to a huge stone wall, after passing a row of tidy lanterns and stone benches. When Yusuf saw a poster depicting a witch being hunted, she couldn't help but think that the woman looked adorable rather than menacing. Then, from behind him, a familiar, threatening voice asked him directly if he truly thought that. The grim priest asked Yusuf what he was doing close to the notice board without waiting for a response. He explained that he was interested in the appearance of a witch that his friends had been talking about earlier that day. Yusuf remarked in silence that Manurva, the grim priest, didn't look nearly as menacing as he had at first. However, Yusuf, who had presented himself as an ordinary merchant, felt a sudden chill of fear when he was asked if he was afraid of the witch. This made him realize how powerful his interlocutor really was. Yusuf went on to say that he felt sorry for the witch even though his viewpoint was irrelevant. Despite all the warnings, Yusuf was unable to determine whether his interlocutor had said something dangerous when his eyes suddenly flashed with a frightening light. The somber priest gave Yusuke such a severe look that it made him shiver. The grim priest, with an unexpected cheerfulness in his voice, asked if Yusuf was a good man, which left him slightly at a loss. The question itself sounded very strange in the context of everything that was going on, and he wasn't sure how to respond to it. Yusuf responded clumsily that he thought of himself as a good man and that maybe the witch wouldn't be as frightening as they claimed if he got to know her. But everyone else said otherwise, and Yusuf himself had likely heard such horrors, the grim priest retorted. Although Yusuf felt his interlocutor was behaving a little oddly, he was positive that things were obviously better now than they had been. Yusuf made the decision to lighten the mood after observing that it was becoming a bit tense. From his backpack, he took out some caramel chocolate, a confection that is known to bring joy. He offered it to the gloomy priest, hoping to at least ease the situation a little. Eating chocolate was known to have a unique ability to lift anyone's spirits, even the most depressed. When he questioned why the witch was so despised, he was informed that people tended to favor happier and more attractive girls. However, Yusuha found the witch to be pretty. He remarked aloud that she simply appeared worn out. He was asked whether he liked the witch by the gloomy priest. He did think she was tall and pretty, after all. A little embarrassed, Yusuf went on to say that it would only improve the impression if she smelled nice. But he secretly questioned why he was even conversing with the gloomy priest in such an odd way. Yusuke wondered if the dark priest had ever encountered witches, and he briefly replied that he had once upon a time. The dark priest then responded that he thought they were dangerous when Yusuke asked if he liked them. The gloomy priest saw that Yusuke had presented him with a strawberry dessert. Yusuke enthusiastically described the 4 flavors: pistachio, milk, caramel, and strawberry. Manurva wanted to purchase every flavor right away, and the topic of active sales suddenly came up. Then, casually, he decided to ask Yusuke's name. Speaking to Manurva, Yasuhihagi smiled as he said his name. Although Yusuke wasn't sure if the chocolate had anything to do with it, they were able to communicate much more easily and openly. He even had the impression that beneath Manurva's exterior melancholy lay a fairly unremarkable individual with typical flaws. He smiled and teased her, saying that while he was pleased with the purchases, eating too many sweets was bad for your health and your pocketbook. Manurva freely acknowledged that he just loved sweets and couldn't stop. Unexpectedly, Minerva asked Yusuha what foods he enjoyed in response. After giving it some thought, he acknowledged that he ate nearly anything and had no particular preferences. But if he gave it some thought, he most likely preferred fruit and chicken. But all of a sudden, as though recalling something, Minerva brought the topic back to the witch, as though it were far more significant to him than food. Returning to her earlier query, Minerva asked him directly if Yus thought the witch was really cute. He was a little surprised. He thought it strange that the grim priest kept asking him what he thought. Yus sighed, saying that understanding someone requires first getting to know them personally and that it's all a matter of taste. As Yusa made his way back to the dungeon, he was astounded by how many people had gathered. Something out of the ordinary had obviously occurred. The crowd let out a cry, requesting that everyone move aside as one of the adventurers had suffered a serious injury to his leg. Then there were anxious voices requesting a healer. It became distinctly tense at the entrance to the dungeon. To Yusa's surprise, the wounded young explorer turned out to be Rugal, the newcomer he had met with Garm earlier in the day. The boy was white and writhing in agony as he lay on a stretcher. Somebody in the crowd yelled that the boy was bleeding profusely and that they might not have time to get him to the hospital, but the cries of panic persisted. There wasn't a single healing potion in his supplies, so Yusa looked around them bewildered. He searched wildly for a candy that might even provide some respite. Minerva suddenly emerged from the throng. When Yusuf saw him, he ran to him in a panic and gasped for air, asking if he had any bandages. When he received a negative response, he was disappointed and once again lost hope. However, Minerva calmly declared that she could heal wounds before Yusuf could respond. It sounded surprising, almost unbelievable. Minerva slowly lifted her hand and compressed the air surrounding Rugal's wound while chanting a spell softly. The bleeding immediately ceased, and his leg skin started to mend, leaving only a faint scar. Yusuf, who had never witnessed healing magic firsthand, watched with his mouth hanging open. He briefly lost track of time and his own excitement because it was so amazing and impressive. He made sure to inform Minerva about it right away. Yusuf remained curious about what had transpired in the dungeon even after Rugal thanked Minerva for saving him. The fact that even seasoned adventurers could encounter difficulties sparked his curiosity. He pondered the dungeon's increased danger and the forces that lurked there, forces that even powerful groups couldn't always defeat. Yusuf kept thinking about the dungeon, even in the morning. He could clearly see that it was a very dangerous place, and he could not fathom Merle and Mira risking their lives every day to go there. Merle was ecstatic when she finally received the Phantom Knight card a few days later. For Merle, it was a huge coup, even though most adventurers wouldn't care that it was an R-class card. "Today was one of the happiest days of my life," Merle said, her eyes bright. She knew there was no need to hurry, but she really wanted to activate her Phantom Knight card now. She exclaimed with pride that this card would serve as her lucky charm and talisman for all of her future travels. While Yusa was observing her, he couldn't help but think that although Merle was fortunate today, he was truly unlucky. Yusuf had the impression that the day had been awful from the beginning. Yusuf's pastry shop was in terrible shape, while Merle was giddy with happiness after obtaining a rare Phantom Knight card and referring to it as her lucky charm. He was having trouble selling his goods because he had given a customer too much change and someone had broken a display case, damaging the counter. All of this occurred in a single day, and it appeared that problems were just following one another. He had no idea when it would be over. Merle was so thrilled with her card luck that she felt she had to try the chocolate lottery. Yus was astounded by her tenacity and unwavering optimism as he watched her. She never gave up in spite of all of her previous setbacks. Yusuf suddenly became aware of the guards approaching. His heart skipped a beat. Had someone reported him for those words about the witch? He recalled referring to her as sweet, and he now pondered whether that was deemed improper in this place. They declared that there would now be a license check and asked everyone to get their license plates ready. Yusuf became aware that he lacked a trading license as the guards drew closer. He was taken aback. He had never thought that in this world, selling goods required a permit. He had been operating his company all this time without even recognizing that he was in violation of the law. Yusuke became aware of the situation. His heart was racing in his throat, and he was unsure whether to scream aloud and try to get away or to act as though nothing was wrong. Merle was excitedly examining her new card, and Yus didn't want to do anything illegal in front of his regular customers. The guards had already come to his counter, and icily demanded to see his trademark while he was deep in thought. Yusu, looking down, admitted that he didn't have a trademark and apologized. Yusu, feeling increasingly uneasy every second, quietly responded that he had been trading here for about 8 days when the guards sternly demanded that he tell them how long he had been doing so. Merle and Mira watched in astonishment. Yusuke had been warned that he might end up behind bars. Luckily for Yusuke, the police only decided to issue a fine because of his honesty and cooperation. They gave him the firm but non-hostile advice to get a trade license right away in order to prevent more issues. The guards added, particularly if Yusuf really intended to keep conducting business in the city. Yusuf nodded grudgingly, relieved but nervous, for he still had a lot to learn about this world and its laws. How Yusuf could be so unsophisticated and operate a business without a license baffled Merle. Yusuf made an effort to clarify, stating that he had just recently moved to the city and was not yet acquainted with all of the rules. He mentioned Japan when asked where he had previously lived, but was informed that no one in the world had ever heard of such a nation. Merle couldn't understand how Yusuf, who seemed so serious, could do such stupid things. Merle was shocked when Mira described his behavior as cute. Given the circumstances, she was surprised to hear that from her friend. Mira certainly had a knack for producing worthless men, Merle believed. She found it incomprehensible that Mira was able to tolerate Yusuf's ridiculous actions with such composure. With little money left over after the fine, Yusuf cautiously inquired about the license's cost, hoping it wouldn't be excessive. After giving it some thought, Mira responded that, if her memory served her well, a trading license was approximately 12,000 lira. Yusuf's heart tightened at the sound of this magnitude. Almost all of his remaining balance was 4,000, and he was still far short of the necessary sum. Anxious thoughts of how he was going to escape this predicament raced through his mind. Yusuf thought about how hard it would be for him to make ends meet in this city if he couldn't continue his business, even though he still had money left over for a place to stay. His thoughts were interrupted by Merle, who smiled and told him he was fortunate she was kind, causing panic to creep up on him. Uncertain of her meaning, Yusuf gazed at her bewildered. She informed him that he could operate his business without a license in one location in the town. Yusuf was ecstatic. Merle clarified that, under specific circumstances, trade could be carried out in a hidden area of the city without a license. Not anticipating this kind of turn of events, Yusuf was ecstatic and nearly incredulous that his problems could be resolved. Having recently been fined himself, Yusuke found it difficult to believe what Merle was telling him. But she explained with assurance that this was most likely taking place underground. Yusuke initially struggled to understand what she was saying, but when he did, he became alarmed. Unbelieving, Yusuf immediately inquired as to whether she was implying that he trade in the dungeon. That was precisely what she meant, Merle said, with a slight smile and curiosity, as though it were the most straightforward answer. Doubt gripped Yusuf. Would he be able to enter the dungeon at all? An inner voice kept yelling louder and louder that it was too dangerous while his thoughts were disorganized. The girl was busy preparing the food as she stood at the counter and hummed softly. She looked lighter and more elegant thanks to her long, flowing hair that cascaded down her back. Her work was finally finished. 3 delectable sandwiches, all beautifully folded and adorned, were seated on the counter in front of her, and there were also delectable desserts. She packed the food into a box with care. She then discreetly and assuredly put on her unusual but cozy secret boots, which gave her a little height boost and more self-assurance. Over her shoulders, she draped a dark cape with a collar of snow-white fur. The soft, fluffy fur added a unique elegance to her appearance and contrasted well with her clothes. Manurva, the enigmatic person concealed behind the mask, put it on, straightened her attire, and went outside, still in a cheerful mood, humming a tune as though her entire existence depended on it. Despite her mysterious appearance, Yusuf frequently referred to her as a gloomy priest, but today she exuded lightness. But an unanticipated encounter cut short her happy mood. She unknowingly ran into someone while traveling. Only her eyes were visible due to the mask covering her face. Their eyes seemed capable of freezing everything around them because they were so frighteningly piercing. The intrepid traveler who had previously collided with her was terrified and fled, yelling aloud. Minerva wanted to apologize, but there was no time to say anything. It all happened too fast. Early in the morning, near the entrance to the dungeon, Merle and Mira met and greeted each other with smiles. But Yusa was obviously anxious because he had come so early. He acknowledged that his initial experience in the dungeon was the cause of his anxiety. Despite the welcoming environment, he was overcome with fear and uncertainty. Murl grinned and offered him support, stating that the witch would take care of all the monsters on this level herself, and that he hadn't planned to go all the way down to battle her. Full of admiration, Yusa referred to her as a beauty, not concealing his pleasure at her self-assurance and fortitude. Yusa realized that since he did not have the required license, he could no longer sell candies close to the dungeon. Trading was feasible, though, inside the dungeon, where the regulations were different. He decided he would be able to enter because this gave him hope. But his concerns remained. He continued to be troubled by thoughts of the unknown and possible challenges. The dungeon's entrance looked like a subway entrance, but Yusuha was astounded by more than just how much it resembled well-known urban infrastructure. The walls themselves started to glow, evoking a magical ambience. He was dumbfounded and in awe as he stood there, unable to take his eyes off it. Observing his astonishment, Mira calmly clarified that there were 60 steps on this staircase. Merle took Yusuha to the location where he could do business as promised. They descended farther and farther until they came to the top of the stairs. Even in a strange and hazardous location like the dungeon, Yusuha was truly happy to be able to carry on with his work in spite of his nervousness. It was an opportunity to protect what he had begun. As Mira and Merle adamantly reaffirmed, it was forbidden to trade close to the entrance. It was a violation, and such lawlessness would even infuriate the adventurers themselves. The group eventually arrived at the dungeon's exact entrance. In front of them was a huge arch made of dark stone. They went inside and started looking around the dungeon. Ignorant of the darkness and cold that surrounded them, Merle and Mira strolled with assurance, as though they were returning to a familiar setting. But Yusuf remained cautious, his eyes darting about, looking back all the time, trying to catch every detail. Every sound reverberated in his mind with alarm. Everything here was unfamiliar and unsettling. Merle commended Yusuf for his hard work. In spite of his nervousness and the strange surroundings, he had arrived at the destination of the second zone with honor. The group's spirits were considerably raised when Mira observed with relief that they had not come across any monsters during their journey. In response, Yusuf promptly kept his promise and produced some of his friend's favorite candies. To her surprise, the bag of monster chips was gone when Merle reached for it. Since the dungeon's conditions precluded the carrying of extraneous items, Yusuf subtly clarified that he had reduced his selection and only brought the necessities. As though exaggerating, Merle let out a dramatic sigh and even shed a stingy tear as she gazed sorrowfully at Yusuf, as though she had lost something precious. Confused, Yusuf started to defend himself by saying that he just couldn't afford to carry everything and that the dungeon might be dangerous. He was in the middle of this awkward situation when he realized that he had given the owner of Badakuro, where he had been spending the night, those unfinished chips. The present had delighted the woman. Yusuf suddenly felt as though the gap between him and her was closing once more after recalling this. He had discovered a very valuable map that might still be useful in the pack he had given away. He carried it with him. Merle and Mira soon bid each other farewell and proceeded farther into the dungeon. Yusuf had once found a valuable map by accident in the same bag of chips he'd given to Badakuro's owner, and he kept it with him now, seeing the find as a sign of good fortune. Soon after, Yusuf was left alone at his selected trading post, prepared to start a new chapter in his life, as Merle and Mira bid farewell and proceeded farther into the dungeon. Yusuf started to examine his surroundings closely, evaluating the location of his trading location. As though the underground market had a life of its own, people had set up their little stalls directly in the stone niches, creating an odd but comfortable atmosphere. He decided it was time to meet some people and went to meet his neighbors. Nearby was Mirai, which sold fragrant tea that radiated peace and coziness. Sanga, a powerfully built blacksmith, was sitting on the opposite side, surrounded by blanks and tools. The silence was abruptly broken by a faint rustling sound that reverberated throughout the trading area and ran along the walls. The atmosphere abruptly changed, and everyone became cautious. An enormous hammer was already in Sanga's hands. They were obviously monsters. Even in the trading area, safety could be a myth, as the dungeon was reminding everyone. Because the dungeon did not pardon negligence, Yusuf was aware that something similar might occur. However, he was ready. He was confident because he had that valuable map he had discovered in the bag of chips. A swarm of goblins appeared as the first silhouettes appeared out of the tunnel's shadows. They were numerous, and they got closer with each step. A dull, guttural roar and the sound of footsteps filled the dungeon. As the threat increased, Yusuf swiftly drew his monster summon card. Without hesitation, he turned it on in the hopes that things wouldn't get out of hand. A standard C-rank summoned goblin, less dangerous than the ones already approaching them, was revealed in a bright flash of light. Yusuf knew that even a beginner could manage this goblin's weakness. Nevertheless, even though the goblin was merely one of many monsters, his strength was insufficient to defeat the entire horde. Yusuha was not alarmed by this. He thought the goblin could handle it. Yusuf was astounded to see his goblin confidently defeat the swarm of monsters in spite of its seeming weakness. Each blow was accurate, each move carefully considered. In contrast to its less well-organized peers, the goblin exhibited remarkable agility, and the horde fell with each passing second. But even though the goblin was successful, Yusuf soon discovered that there were a lot more monsters. Yusuf wasted no time in using his cards to call forth other creatures. Although they were all C-rank, their diversity might be the deciding factor. A tiny, incredibly agile creature known as a pixie fairy was called forth by the first card. The pixie started to divert the monster's attention with its swift and eerie movements, confusing and upsetting them. He then used a feathered feather card, which depicted a bird with a strong bite that could penetrate monster defenses with its pointed beak. The enemy's numbers were rapidly reduced by these new aids, causing chaos within the horde and increasing Yusuha's chances of victory. The situation started to shift with each blow and move the goblin made. With each new movement, his blows became more accurate and lethal as he confidently reduced the number of monsters. The goblin proved to be a true fighter in spite of his apparent rudeness and crude weapons. The size of the battle astounded Yusuf. The tension and surprise were evident in the trembling of his hands and the sweat streaming down his forehead. The battle had taken an unexpected turn, he realized. In most cases, only one goblin appeared out of the fog. He left everyone in a state of shock. There were more monsters than even the most experienced explorers and traders, who had been in the dungeon for a long time. 3 minutes had gone by when Yusuf summoned the goblin, and his time was up, so it disappeared. Other dungeon traders yelled at him at that precise moment, promising to pick up the rewards for slaying monsters. Yusuf was shocked to learn that fighting monsters could bring in money for merchants as well, and that the dungeon was a place to exploit such unforeseen circumstances in addition to trading. "May I share my loot with the other merchants?" Yusuf asked. It was his victory, they said, and he should spend the prize however he saw fit. He inspected his treasure, which included 200 lire in pure coins and a number of magic crystals, each valued at around 10 lire. Yusuf felt more assured after realizing how adventurers earn money in the dungeons, and the total came to 240 lire. In the end, Yusuf lost money because, even though he had been given 240 lira, he had used 3 summoning cards, each of which had a price tag. His net profit was much lower than he had anticipated after accounting for the card costs. On the other hand, Yusuf's presence in the dungeon delighted the other merchants. He was embarrassed when they started referring to him as a summoner. Yusuf denied it right away, claiming that he was not a magical summoner but rather a regular pastry chef. However, adventurers who had previously purchased his candies at the dungeon entrance suddenly materialized as soon as he said this. They greeted him with joy after recognizing him. With a smile on his face, Yusuf hurriedly opened his confectionery store and got ready to sell his treats. The atmosphere of the dungeon, with its distinct merchants and adventurers, didn't bother him. He felt comfortable here. But by midday, the dungeon was much quieter than it had been earlier. Sensing the lull, Yusuf made the decision to inquire as to whether Sang and Mirai were still at work at this hour. With a laugh, Sang responded that his primary work was only getting started. Adventurers were always in need of assistance with weapons, and his blacksmithing was always in demand. In response, Mirai clarified that her team might help injured explorers, particularly those coming back from combat. And something occurred right before lunchtime. Manurva showed up in search of Yusuf. She was unaware that he had recently been fined for engaging in unlawful trading close to the dungeon and that he needed to buy a license, which he lacked the money to do. Manurva's search for Yusuf caught him off guard. She was viewed as evil and dark by the other merchants in the dungeon, but Yusuf reassured her that she was his friend and urged her not to make snap judgments about her appearance. Manurva suddenly remembered something crucial and moved closer to Yusuha. With a hint of embarrassment, Minerva gave Yusuha the packed lunchbox and offered to eat lunch with him if he was open to it. Yusuha was caught off guard by this. He hadn't anticipated such a gesture and was momentarily unsure of how to respond. It included a sandwich with fried chicken, bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes, a beautifully arranged bento box, and a vibrant fruit platter for dessert. Minerva acknowledged that he had unintentionally produced more than he could consume. Yusuf found it surprising and even a little touching that Minerva had created all of this herself, and he was completely perplexed by it. Yusuf was pleasantly surprised by the sandwich's flavor, which was well balanced and rich. As he acknowledged that Minerva was a true chef, his eyes glistened. Sincerely happy that Yusuha enjoyed everything, Minerva started dancing joyfully at that very moment. Yusuha had witnessed this reaction previously, and while it appeared to be quite happy, its unexpected emotionality slightly unsettled him. Yusuha offered to serve Minerva a cup of tea to go with their meal because he felt he should reward her. He went up to Mirai and asked nicely for one, and she promptly gave it to him after feeling a little intimidated by Minerva's powerful aura. Minerva let out an indignant shout at that very moment. Why was he talking to other girls, and what was he doing? Since Yusa had only intended to purchase tea, he was utterly baffled as to how that could have sparked such a response. For lunch, he brought them each a cup of tea. Distressed, Minerva turned away and started muttering to himself that he had been duped by the older woman, and that it had been a mistake. Yusa thought maybe Minerva hadn't had enough, but he couldn't understand why he was so upset. At the same time, the day was coming to an end, and explorers coming back from the lower levels started climbing the dungeon passageways. After visiting the lower floors, Mira and Merle came back feeling content but exhausted. The following day, Merle, who was brimming with enthusiasm and energy, proposed to Yusuka that they open a bakery even further down in the basement, where she claimed there would be more opportunities and customers. Merle clarified that a room large enough to accommodate a full-fledged shop was located on the next level of the dungeon, close to the stairs. Yusuke gave this offer some thought, and saw that it might be a great chance to grow his company. In between descending into the depths of the dungeon, adventurers would temporarily take refuge here. Since there was a constant stream of adventurers and the sweets would be greatly appreciated, Merle was confident Yusuke could make a lot more money there. It would also be more convenient for everyone, she thought. Yusuf made the bold decision to try it since he still had some rockets and monster cards. All he did was ask Merle where he was going. Mira smiled and reassured him that he wouldn't be alone and that they would accompany Yusuka to his new residence. The attention was a little embarrassing for Yusuka. Minerva appeared out of nowhere, her eyes instantly focusing on Mira as she flirted with Yusuha with a smile. Minerva became irritated upon realizing this. She was certain that she would eventually do something to this girl if the atmosphere stayed this positive. Minerva couldn't let anyone so easily divert Yusuha's focus. Exasperated by the situation, Yus became angry and turned to Minerva, declaring that he would not permit her to treat his regular clients in such a manner. During an emotional outburst, he lightly slapped her on the back of the head in the hopes that she would realize that such behavior was not acceptable. When Merle inquired about Yus's intention to go farther into the dungeon after observing a shift in his demeanor, Yusa nodded assuredly, reaffirming his choice. As planned, they reconvened at the dungeon's entrance the following morning. But Merle and Mira appeared less animated this time. Minerva, who had suddenly materialized at the dungeon's entrance that morning, was the cause of their sullen attitude. Yusa was shocked to see a dark priest in this location, and was instantly drawn to his sullen figure. Observing his response, Minerva simply said in a low voice that it appeared their fates were entwined more often than one might think. Without further delay, the four of them entered the dungeon and started down the well-known staircase, which led deeper and deeper. Soon after, Yusa discovered he was in an unfamiliar area of the dungeon and that he needed to ascend 2 more floors to get to his new trading post. They were walking through a much wider passage than he had anticipated. Merle clarified that this kind of expansion was required. This area frequently became congested, particularly when merchants were temporarily residing here or when big groups of adventurers were passing through. Minerva halted suddenly, his eyes flashing, and he screamed aloud, demanding to know why Merle and Mira were taking Yusuf to the break room and letting him do as he pleased. His voice reverberated throughout the corridor. Yusuf intended to open a pastry shop there, Merle explained with a cool nod. For a moment, the air appeared to freeze. Yusa looked confusedly from Minerva to the girls, unable to comprehend why he was acting so oddly once more, as though every action caused a flurry of emotions. When they eventually arrived at the dungeon's desired room, Yusa was astounded by its size. It was larger than a normal lounge area and more akin to a banquet hall in an affluent home. He was taken aback by the room's spacious walls, high ceilings, and tidy, almost comfortable layout. He set up his pastry shop with enthusiasm without wasting any time. Yusa was taken aback by the bakery's change after casting a spell to open it. Was he truly that much leveled up? Cozy lamps, shelves with colorful packaging, and clean counters appeared. He was incredulous at what he saw as he looked around. Mira asked Yusa the meaning of the neatly written kanji, as she leaned curiously over the counter. She was confused because it said Yahagi Patisserie in Japanese, and she thought the font was odd and not like the local tongue. It should come as no surprise that Japanese people belonged to a world that was entirely different from Yusa's own. Merle saw something out of the ordinary and cried out in shock. As she sobbed, Yusa turned to see what in his new patisserie had captured her interest. It turned out to be Dungeon Strategy, a slot machine. 10 coins were flipped around the edge and would land close to a lever in this game. A prize would show up when players made it to the 7th basement floor. To Yusuke's surprise, the prize was described as a cure-all. Although it appeared to be quite impressive from the outside, Yusa believed that the cost of the game in this machine was in fact higher than in its Japanese counterparts. Yusa reasoned that this might explain the game's high cost because the prize in the machine might not be a toy or a coin, but rather a cure-all that could address significant issues. Upon seeing the machine, Yusa was taken aback and inquired about the quality of the reward from Mira. Mira responded with surprise that the panacea was an incredible prize, clearly embarrassed. Even seasoned adventurers seldom came across people with the panacea, and she thought the item was worth at least 1,000,000 lire. Yusa came to the realization that the prize he was going to get was much more valuable than he had anticipated. After hearing what Mira and Yusuha had to say, Merle took out her money right away, her eyes gleaming, and she boldly declared that she had to have this panacea, which cost a whole $1,000,000 for sure. Merle had faith in her skills. She was well aware that everything in this situation was under her skill, as opposed to ordinary gambling, where everything is determined by chance. She thought she had every chance of winning with this strategy. She possessed both intelligence and talent. Merle was confident, but she didn't make a proper throw during the game. She threw coins, but they didn't land in the proper spot. Ignorant of the speed at which her money was vanishing, Merle kept trying. She felt she was getting close, but luck was still not on her side, and every new throw made things more tense. Merle turned to see a number of adventurers huddled nearby, observing her misfortunes. Disappointed, she gave the machine one last glance before heading out of the room with her head lowered without saying goodbye. Upon observing her condition, Yusa urged everyone to look after themselves. Yusa stood at the exit that night and wished the adventurers good dreams as they prepared to leave the room. He wanted to rush home, shut the door, and leave. He was earning over 4,000 lira at the moment. Yusa pondered as he stood at the machine. Now that he was the owner, Merle felt compelled to give it a shot himself because he had come so close to winning. He approached the counter, grabbed a couple of coins, and thought about it. Someone had taught him the proper way to play in a previous life. There were many hazards in the dungeon, and Yusa couldn't help but consider how crucial the cure was to him. There was only one way to get it and win this game, but he knew it could save his life at any time. Due to the substantial increase in daily sales, Yusuha was now able to try his luck at the game multiple times. Yusa grinned as he watched Merle and Mira come into the bakery, beaming and joyful. Although he was aware that the day was coming to an end, the choice was obvious. Working here would be far more lucrative than at the dungeon's entrance. His loyal clientele was pleased, and new business was beginning to come in more regularly. Yusa proposed that they all go home together after spotting Manurva with Mira and Merle. Though cautious as usual, Manurva appeared sincere in her concern for Yusa's safety. Although he expressed concern for him, he hoped that if Mira and Merle were present, they would let him join. Startled by this show of concern, Yusa honestly remarked that Manurva was very nice. But when Mira and Merle heard this, they just looked at each other. They had incompleteness in their eyes. Everyone sensed an awkward atmosphere as they started to climb out of the dungeon. A dark aura emanated from Manurva and hung in the air. Their companionship was not made more comfortable by his quiet and icy stare. But Yusa couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling she had. Yusuf made the decision to ask Merle if he could continue playing the game in any other isolated areas of the dungeon. He didn't want to draw undue attention because he might be ejected from the inn if he began yelling or making noise, and it would be much riskier outside where robbers could pick him up. He knew that in order to try to win the panacea, he needed to act sensibly and discreetly while looking for a suitable location. He was startled when Manurva, who was listening intently to Yusuf, abruptly came up to him. He declared that he had a solution in a quiet but assured manner. Yusuf grew cautious, anticipating something surprising from Manurva. But all Manurva said was that she would walk him home. With a startled expression on his grave face, Merle couldn't help but laugh, but she quickly covered her mouth with her hand. Mira, on the other hand, was equally taken aback but soon became alert as everything came to light. Surprised, Yusuf turned to Manurva and inquired, "Did he really have a house now?" Manurva had, after all, rented a standard hotel room before, just like him. As it happened, Manurva had just rented the entire house, and he didn't care if anyone shouted or played there. Manurva only asked Yusuf to join him for dinner in return. Merle and Mira were even more taken aback, but they grinned and watched with curiosity. Yusuf was unable to determine whether Manurva was taking this too seriously. But all he wanted was to support his friend. Yusuf grinned broadly and consented to Manurva's request without giving it any special consideration. Mira and Merle, meanwhile, were already engrossed in their romantic fantasies, seeing things very differently than Yusuf did. It all seemed like a dream, and Manurva himself was unable to believe what was happening. Yusuf was actually planning to visit his home. He recalled how he had previously touched his shoulder without fear, and now he was unsure of how to acknowledge that he was a girl. Though he was tormented by emotions, love was the ultimate motivator behind everything he did. In reality, Manurva was Michelle, the witch whose head adventurers had been hunting for a long time and about whom horrible legends had been told. Michelle was now certain that she would have to love Yusuf covertly while posing as Manurva. She had no right to disclose who she really was. At a store just in front of the dungeon entrance, Yusuf purchased adventurer's attire. Even though they were comfortable, his old clothes were totally inappropriate for the hazardous situation. The new ensemble had many pockets and thick fabric, making it far more functional. Since his dungeon business was booming and sales were increasing every day, Yusuf started thinking about relocating from Badakuro to a more comfortable area near his new location. He came across something that might be helpful for home improvement, while perusing the shelves of the store where he had recently bought adventurer's apparel. He turned to Manurva and inquired inquisitively as to whether his home was heated. It seemed significant, and almost solemn to him that he was going to spend the night with his first friend in this new world tonight. His soul was filled with warmth and excitement. Still perusing the merchandise, Yusuf asked Manurva if he drank alcohol to lighten the mood of the evening. He offered to take some, grinning. Yusuf selected a 3,000 lira red wine. Unlike anything he was used to in his native world, it was dark and had a rich, tart flavor. Yusuf expressed his excitement, and said he was looking forward to the evening. Michelle's face flushed slightly with embarrassment as she thought about what Yusuf wanted to do, but she couldn't figure it out. Michelle believed that Yusuf was ideal and that everything would work out as she danced. When Yusuf saw her movements, he was once more perplexed by the odd gesture and merely shook his head, uncertain of how to respond. Eventually, they made their way to Michelle's home. Wide-eyed and with repressed excitement, Mira and Merle peered around the corner, trying to be discreet. They looked at each other and whispered confidently that this was definitely a date as they watched the couple leave. Given that both Yusuf and the Grim Priest were men, Mira scowled, wondering if this was a typical date between them. At least initially. Her perplexity only increased. But Merle's eyes were gleaming as she recalled one of her favorite books. Holding their breath and attempting to be silent, Mira and Merle followed them all the way to the house. But they were shocked to see that the street was deserted when they looked around the final corner, where the house should have been. Manurva and Yusuf were nowhere to be found. The girls looked at each other, wondering how they had missed them. Had they just disappeared? Yusuf and Manurva, meanwhile, strolled peacefully down that same street, oblivious to the pursuit. Looking around curiously, Yusuf was taken aback by how serene and quiet the place was, as though the bustle of the city had vanished. There was a special magical block in place there, Manurva explained. Yusuf turned and made the decision to ask Manurva what he had done. Yusuf was pleasantly surprised to see how clean, well-maintained, and even elegant everything in the house appeared. With its plush carpets, tastefully placed furniture, and opulent-looking accents, the interior was warm and inviting. The atmosphere seemed to fill him with comfort and tranquility. Manurva's house was more pleasant than he had anticipated. "The house could be better," Manurva replied modestly. Despite having its own bathroom, the house was surprisingly comfortable and well-maintained. Manurva motioned for Yasuha to use it, but she quickly showed signs of anxiety and inquired as to whether he was hungry or in need of anything else. He was obviously very concerned about tonight. Manurva suddenly started to cough and gasp for breath. Without pausing for a moment, Yus hurried to meet him. In an attempt to conceal the tremor in his voice, Manurva turned away and apologized in private for the incident. He reassured Yasuha that there was nothing to be concerned about, explaining that it was just an uncontrollable power surge. However, he appeared pale and gaunt in spite of his assurances. Uncertain whether this was actually the result of too much magical energy, Yasuha watched him suspiciously. Was this a typical magic-related reaction? While Yasuha prepared dinner, Manurva insisted that he take a bath. Reluctant to allow his guests to enter the kitchen, he adamantly declined any assistance. Yusa did not protest when confronted with unexpected resolve. Instead, he gave in and went to the restroom, reasoning that it would be best not to bother the owner because of his persistent demands. Once Michelle was certain Yusa had gone to the restroom, she took off her mask gradually. The idea that she could now do him a favor made her heart race and her blood flow more quickly. With anticipation and excitement, her blood pressure increased. This was her opportunity, the ideal time to shed the persona of a sulky priest and make every effort to be a real mistress of the home. Like everything she did, Michelle chopped vegetables vigorously, making sure every piece was flawless. The atmosphere in the kitchen was one of gentle magic and concentration. She used spells to speed up cooking and improve the taste and texture of the ingredients with each hand movement. With each addition of ingredients, it seemed as though she infused a piece of herself into the dish, and the air was filled with the aroma of fresh herbs and spices, and the kitchen itself was brimming with magical energy. Out of nowhere, she heard Yusuha's voice behind her. She was still in the kitchen without her mask. Michelle didn't look back and kept cooking. She tried to do everything flawlessly because she was too preoccupied with the procedure. Her heart, however, skipped a beat when she heard Yusuha's voice. It seems that he was unaware that she had yet to put on her mask while he was in the kitchen. When Michelle saw Yusu's body, her heart began to race. She noticed that he was actually muscular in addition to being attractive. She made an effort to conceal her emotions, but it was difficult to ignore his muscularity. At that moment, she wanted to touch him. Michelle advised him to play the slot machine, which is what he had come for, when Yusuha asked if he could help with anything. Since Yusuha appeared to be much more interested in cooking dinner than she was, she didn't even consider stopping him. He nodded sheepishly, forgetting a little about his plan to try his luck. Michelle turned away, trying to focus on her cooking as she flushed. She wanted to hide her nervousness. It took Yusuha a while to realize what had happened. Since his friend had suddenly become so reclusive, he pondered whether she had really gotten oil on her or something else. He went to play the slot machine in another room. He could now call forth just the items he required, rather than his entire confectionery. Yusuha visited Manurva's home today in an attempt to acquire a unique elixir. He had a lot of faith that he would be lucky. Yusuha started to understand that the task wasn't so easy after making multiple unsuccessful attempts to win at the slot machine. He was abruptly summoned to the dinner table by Manurva. The invitation arrived at the perfect moment, and Yusuha became aware that he was growing hungry. A glass of red wine, grilled lamb chops with mustard, and lobster mousse greeted Yusuka as she entered the kitchen. The food was delicious in addition to looking incredibly expensive. Additionally, the scent was so enticing that it seemed to permeate the air. Yusuka couldn't help but shout with delight how good everything appeared. Manurva tried to hide his excitement by quickly adding that dessert would be served with dinner, feeling a little embarrassed by the compliment. A little taken aback, Yusuka inquired of Manurva when he intended to take off his mask. Seeing that the mask had been on his friend's face from the start, he found it hard to comprehend why he had never removed it. Unexpectedly, Manurva responded that he would only remove it for dinner. Sensing his uneasiness, Manurva laughed quietly and slowly grabbed for the mask. Yusuka eagerly awaited the moment when he would finally see his friend's face, watching every move he made. When Yusuka took off his mask to eat dinner, Manurva noticed his displeasure and smiled, using magic to hide his face. He said it would be more comfortable and carried on eating. Although he made an effort to hide it, Yusa wasn't very happy with this choice. They ate in peace while exchanging good wishes. They ate their fill and relished the time spent at the table as the evening went by in a laid-back setting with delicious food and a warm atmosphere. Unable to forget what had transpired that night, Michelle sat in the darkness of her mind. She couldn't imagine her life without Yusa because of how enthralling his care and attention had been. His attention spoiled her, and now she felt unable to let him go. Like a fog that grew thicker by the second, Michelle sank into the blackness of her thoughts. She had the perilous notion to construct an unending hallway from which Yusa would never be able to get out. Michelle let out a dejected scream. She was aware that she would lose everything, including his respect, if she carried out this plan. She was positive that Yusa would despise her, and she would lose him forever if she did this. But she was unable to relax because her mind was in such disarray. The screams coming from the other room made Yusa wonder if the cats were fighting. Unaware of his friend's condition, he went to bed quietly after a long day. Michelle was suddenly in his room, directly above the sleeping Yusa. She watched Yusa sleep soundly while perched on the edge of his bed. The world appeared to have stopped, and he was breathing calmly. When Yusa saw a stranger in the room, he screamed in panic and jumped up in bed. He looked bewilderedly at the man seated beside him as his heart raced. Manurva calmly wished him a good morning, as though nothing had happened. Still reeling from the shock, Yusa finally asked him why he was there. Manurva acknowledged that he was just observing Yusa sleep, feeling a little ashamed of what he had done. Feeling even more confused, Yusa asked what the strange magical writings and symbols on the floor were. Manurva hurried to clarify that it was just an endless corridor, feeling a little ashamed and obviously uncomfortable about his behavior. As if worried that Yusa would misinterpret something, he started erasing the symbols right away. All of this sounded sinister to Yusa, who asked Manurva inquisitively if he was engaged in any sort of magical research. Without giving a thorough explanation, Manurva quickly responded that it was something else entirely. But Yusa couldn't help but look over his shoulder and see the odd symbols on the ground. He said with a genuine smile that he wanted to thank Manurva for allowing him to stay the night even though his friend hadn't gone to sleep until midnight. Even though Manurva, his friend, appeared to be a rather closed person. A little embarrassed, Manurva acknowledged that Yusa stayed even though people frequently tried to flee when they see him. Yusa replied with a smile that he had decided to stay close instead of fleeing and asked them to forget about it. Manurva, growing more solemn, cautioned Yusuha to handle him carefully and assured him that he would soon comprehend everything. Although this sounded rather sinister, Yusuha chose not to think about what his friend had said. Manurva invited him to the table and said that breakfast was ready. Although there was an odd tension in the air, everyone's attention was on the impending breakfast at that precise moment. He said that breakfast had been really good and thanked Manurva for her assistance. They decided to go to the dungeon together after calmly discussing their plans for the day over breakfast. Yusa, skillfully swerving between onlookers as he strolled through the city streets, made the discreet decision to ask whether Manurva, like all the other adventurers, was pursuing the witch they were now so assiduously looking for. It was a waste of time, they told him. I have more important things to do and I'm not interested in stupid pursuits of rumors, Manurva calmly replied. Manurva showed him a tiny gadget she was developing at the moment. Yusa asked curiously if it was magical. It turned out to be a magical power-storing amulet. He pondered whether the batteries from his home world worked on a similar principle. When he inquired about the amulet's relationship to the dungeons, Manurva clarified that there was a rift in the dungeon's deepest section that radiated a strong concentration of magical essence, making it the perfect place to charge such artifacts. Manurva carried out her experiments here, introducing the essence emitted from the rift into magical spheres. She acknowledged that she had originally planned to leave the city in pursuit of a better life, but she came to the realization that there were no other places where she could find such sources. She would have to give up all of her research and dreams if she left this rift, which was unique. At last, Yusa arrived at the dungeon's restroom. He expressed gratitude to his friend for escorting him to the common area. Manurva halted abruptly, as though recalling a crucial detail he had overlooked. Still a little reflective, Manurva gave Yusuha a carefully wrapped bento. The packaging, which was tied with thin rope, was lovely and thick. Yusuha was taken aback by the lunch's weight when he picked it up, as though it held more than just food. Minerva clarified that he intended to go even farther into the dungeon today, a place that many people are afraid to enter. He mentioned that he would be spending 3 days away from the city, with the intention of conducting research below during that time. Yusu, who was aware of the risks involved in such expeditions, voiced concern upon learning of his plans and counseled Minerva to look after himself. Regal and other frequent patrons were warmly received by Yusu when he opened his bakery. He walked up to Yusu and thanked him, saying that his leg, which had been hurt a few days before, was feeling much better now. Grinning, Yusu asked Regal to remember to give Minerva credit, saying that she had been instrumental in his recovery. Regal nodded and said that the next time they saw each other, he would thank Minerva. Yusu immediately offered Regal a solution after noticing a recent injury on his arm from a bad fall. He said with a smile that he had the perfect product for these situations, and that it would be a great way to hasten the healing process. Grinning, Yusuke produced some Moroccan pumpkins, which were tiny candies with sweet and sour cream that initially appeared to be a straightforward dessert. He clarified that using a wooden spoon to eat them would yield the best results. These candies have a mild wound-healing effect in addition to satisfying hunger. Regal was a little taken aback by this out-of-the-ordinary offer, so he curiously tried one of the candies and enjoyed the way the sweetness and sourness blended together. After eating the candy, Regal was shocked to see that the scratch on his hand literally vanished. This outcome surpassed all of his expectations. He found it hard to believe that one could both enjoy the taste and heal wounds in a candy store. Yusu grinned as he heard Regal's decision. Despite the client's comment that Mirai's healing tea was more effective than the candies, he was happy that his product had been helpful. Regal stressed that the candies did have one unquestionable benefit, though: they were less expensive and portable. Merle and Mira walked in, drawing attention to themselves with their sudden presence. As soon as Merle heard the conversation come to an end, he was delighted. The thought of candies that could cure wounds thrilled her so much that she immediately bought herself a couple. Myra's eyes automatically went to her friend, who was already contentedly munching on a sweet and sour candy, and she recalled that Merle had recently injured herself. Merle, obviously pleased, kept eating the sweet treat, but after a little while he asked Yusuha what had happened the day before. Her face was filled with curiosity, and even though the candy had brought her unexpected joy, she was unable to forget what had happened the night before. However, a fresh group of adventurers led by Garm entered the break room before Merle could ask her question. He went straight to the counter and ordered 4 Moroccan pumpkins without thinking twice. Considering that the new product had only recently gone on sale, Yusu was taken aback by how rapidly Garm learned about it. He found it incomprehensible that the adventurers had heard about Moroccan pumpkins so rapidly. Observing Merle's pout and evident annoyance, Garm came over curiously and inquired about the situation. He heard a low murmur about following the line in response. The cacophonous horde of adventurers had disappeared by noon. After all the noise and activity, the quiet that pervaded the room felt almost strange, yet it was reassuring. Now that they had some free time, Merle and Mira were the only people left in the break room. Merle had already started playing, carefully adjusting the buttons and levers, enthralled with the new machines. Mira sat close by, occasionally grinning as she watched her friend play. Openly disappointed, Merle continued to try but kept failing. After 20 attempts, she was unable to understand how she could continue to fail. Yus remarked that this game had its own subtleties and that winning required not only luck but also a little cunning, to which Mira, observing her friend, replied that she couldn't even do that. Yus made the decision to have some lunch when it was time. He opened it with a startled sigh, but then he remembered the box Minerva had packed for him. Yusuha received an opulent box from Minerva that was loaded with a variety of foods. There were pickled veggies, fresh fruit, banana cake slices, delectable grilled chicken, and even little desserts inside. Everything appeared to have been prepared with care and attention, and every dish was prepared with precision. Yusuha was astounded by how delicious and well-presented everything was. Merle asked Yus if it was a bento from her beloved after she abruptly noticed what she was doing. Unlike her usual playful gaze, her attentive eyes followed him steadily, and with unusual seriousness. Minerva is the name of his wife, but it was a guy and he was his friend, Yusa joked. This explanation obviously did not sit well with Merle, who pursed her lips. In an attempt to understand what was actually happening, her eyes narrowed and she even cocked her head at one point. Mira, who was standing close by, concurred that Yusa and Minerva appeared to be close friends. Mira smiled as she observed Merle's response, not understanding why she was so concerned, as she persisted in being offended and attempting to prove her point. "I'm positive Minerva loves Yusa," Merle said loudly. Either from the intensity of her words or embarrassment, her face was slightly flushed. As though attempting to persuade her interlocutors of her point, she gestured with her finger. Everyone appeared to be deep in thought as they tried to comprehend what they had just heard, and there was a pause. The atmosphere was tense, as though everyone was trying to think of the perfect way to react. At the same time, Yusa and Mira started pointing out that Merle was wrong, attempting to clarify that she had been reading the situation incorrectly the entire time. Offended by what they had said, Merle was so certain of her position that she had to say out loud that she was right. Unable to comprehend how Yusuha could be so blind and truly ignorant of Minerva's feelings, Merle became more and more irate and screamed at him. As if implying something beyond friendship, they had indeed prepared a delicious and carefully packaged bento for him, and Yusuha himself was starting to have his doubts. Yusuha attempted to clarify, though, that he shouldn't draw hasty judgments, and that he didn't view Minerva's actions as a declaration of love. In response, Merle snorted, saying that rather than just accepting the obvious, it sounded more like he was making things harder for himself. Merle sighed and declared that they had to leave after losing at the slot machine once more. They had to earn some cash before the day was out. Yusufa was deep in contemplation. Despite everything, Minerva was a good man who genuinely cared and was kind. However, Minerva's dislike of women seemed odd when she thought back to specific instances. Yusufa decided to set all his thoughts aside until later, when he would still have time to consider the situation, since Minerva wouldn't be in the city for another 3 days anyhow. 3 days later, Yusufa happened to bump into Minerva on a city street one morning. Minerva offered to go with Yusuha after finding out that they were both going to the dungeon. Yusuha thought this was a little strange, since he could have easily descended the stairs himself. He did not, however, turn down the company. Minerva then gave Yusuha another bento, and this time it was really good. Carefully wrapped, exuding coziness and the scent of freshly made food. Yusuha pondered whether he ought to ask Merle directly, recalling their conversation from 3 days prior. Tormented by whether or not to ask this question at this time, Yusuf called out to Minerva before he could ask any more questions. Minerva paused and spun around, a little taken aback but prepared to hear. Yusuf took Minerva's hand and put something in it without thinking. As a thank you gift for everything he had done, including caring for him and preparing bento, it was a vending machine cure. Although Yusuf was certain Minerva was powerful, he kept safety in mind. He claimed that if he could manage it once, he could do it again, so he would get himself another panacea. Minerva took the cure and suddenly came to a significant realization. Michelle, concealed behind the mask, was certain that this occurred at the precise moment when Yusuha's and her hands made contact. It was then that she knew it was love. He had, after all, given what he so badly desired to someone he valued, with no expectation of anything in return. The gesture had far more significance than he had thought. She found great meaning in this gesture. She endured a challenging and agonizing illness, and the moment he performed for her would live in her memory forever. It was evidence that someone was prepared to make a sacrifice for her welfare, not just a show of concern. Michelle was certain that she would always remember his generosity and the help she got. Yusuf smiled warmly at his regular customers when he opened the pastry shop in the break room that morning. Without wasting any time, Merle went directly to the counter and grinned as she complained that the Moroccan pumpkin package was too small. With a small chuckle, Yusuf assured her that he would shortly introduce a new, 10-time larger package so that everyone could continue to savor the taste and health advantages. Merle yelled in alarm as Minerva suddenly materialized in the break room with a cunning smile. He deliberately did it, relishing the response. In the meantime, Yusuf kept grinning as he greeted Regal, Garm, and numerous other frequent clients. When he was informed that he would be managing the bakery, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Yusuf was sure that his work was what satisfied him, and he genuinely enjoyed it. In the hopes that this stage of his life would last as long as possible, he was prepared to give it all of his passion and energy. At the castle, the king found out that the witch had succeeded in getting a cure-all from the dungeon store. He was concerned because she could have healed herself with this artifact. The witch was able to get the panacea from Yahagi Yusuha's confectionery store, which shocked the king. A brand new capsule vending machine with tiny furniture from a well-known manufacturer has arrived, An expert craftsman created each piece by hand, paying close attention to quality and detail. The first release featured a unique collection of sophisticated chairs and couches that were ideal for dollhouse decor or collectors. The new product, which was the delicate and elegant creation of Japanese artisans, delighted Yusa. Each piece of the miniature furniture appeared to be a true work of art on a smaller scale, and it was remarkable in both quality and detail. No one was purchasing the capsules, despite the fact that it was a fantastic new product. People believed there was nothing unique about the idea, Merle told Yusuka, and that was the reason. Mira echoed her friend's sentiment by nodding in agreement. Merle also pointed out that the cost was excessive. Most people couldn't afford to spend 300 lira on a single piece of toy furniture. Yusuka was let down. He hadn't anticipated such pragmatism from his usual clients. No one was in a rush to purchase any of the toys, even though they were all of excellent quality. Yusuha abruptly declared that he was taking the new product in a confident voice behind him. Yusuha turned around suddenly, as if he had been startled out of his reverie. He had obviously heard someone's voice, so he was truly shocked to see no one when he turned around. He listened, scowled, and looked around the room. Abruptly, the same voice echoed, this time clearly from below, as though it were coming from the floor or beneath the counter. It was a short gnome, only 10 centimeters tall, with a clean beard and a serious face. It was the first time Merle had seen a gnome. Rarely did these earth spirits appear in public. They were known for their wealth, stayed away from crowds, and favored solitude. All of Yusuha's capsules were purchased by the dwarves, who also gave her an unexpected present, a map to a hot spring on the dungeon's second floor. Yusuha was taken aback. He had been surprised by what the dwarves had to offer. The gnomes gave Yusuha the map and said he could use it however he pleased after thanking him for selling such fine goods. When the hot spring was mentioned, Manurva became enraged. To show his disapproval of the way some things were viewed or understood, he suddenly proclaimed that bathing with stupid women was prohibited. Manurva didn't need to worry about the hot springs because they were private, Yusuha explained calmly. Unapologetically curious, Merle went on to say that, even though she was friends with Yusuha, she believed everything to be normal. Dismissing the issue, Mira pointed out that it was only a bath. Mira smiled and added that her friends could always cover themselves with a towel if they felt ashamed. After hearing Mira's remarks, Minerva became enraged once more and angrily declared that he would not pardon her for that remark. The whole group assembled at the dungeon's entrance early the following morning. Merle was eager to get started and could hardly contain her impatience. Minerva, however, was not so readily convinced to join. After much convincing, she eventually agreed to go after a protracted period of hesitation during which she doubted and debated with herself. Yusuha inquired about Minerva's well-being after observing his exhausted appearance, which suggested that he was about to nod off. With a sigh, Minerva acknowledged that he had been up all night battling the pests. According to the map Yusuha was given, the hot springs were monster-free and suitable for leisure. Minerva, however, was unable to stop talking and kept saying that he would watch the girls to make sure they didn't do anything embarrassing. Yusuha became aware that his words had not been understood. Despite being aware that there was no danger nearby, Minerva appeared unduly distracted and unable to unwind. As he made his way to the second floor of the dungeon, Yusuha thought grimly that he had only ever seen others bravely descend into the depths, and now, for the first time, he was entering this unknown and dark realm himself. His footsteps reverberated through space. Merle turned around and inquired as to whether Yusuha had spotted any enemies on the first floor after Mira indicated the way to the second floor. The second floor was much more dangerous and unpredictable, so she advised him to be especially watchful there. Yusuha nodded as he became more aware of the tension in the air. All of the group's attention was suddenly drawn to a recurring sound that reverberated throughout the dungeon. Alarmed, Yusuha thought it might be the monsters, getting closer every second. For the first time, Merle heard the cry and believed it might be a new kind of monster they had never seen before. Mira listened intently, then realized that the sound had a rhythm similar to a flower insect's song, but it sounded different, like a bird. She was particularly uneasy because she had never heard anything like it. Even though the whole company was in a panic, Minerva calmly said that there was nothing to be alarmed about and implied that it was just a pigeon that had gotten lost in the dungeon. There was surprise at what he said. One bird couldn't have made such a noise, Yusuha reasoned. There must have been several. With his usual coolness, Minerva said that the birds were probably just lost and had gathered together, but they had to leave them alone. But the further the group went into the dungeon, the more often they came across flower insects, who kept repeating the same warning, "Michelle, the witch, close by." Michelle became aware that she was unable to flee because of these tiny insects, which were chirping as she got closer. The group would be unable to proceed to the hot springs if they heard their noises and started to interpret what they meant. Michelle hadn't slept well because she tried to get rid of them the day before, but all her efforts had failed. She suddenly had a brilliant idea that could change everything and let her finally get rid of the obnoxious creatures. Instead of attempting to eliminate the insects, Michelle chose to take a different approach and merely substituted a less noticeable and neutral sound for their sound. She made a fake sound signal with her magical powers. But Michelle wasn't sure she could keep it together, and this plan took a whole night to execute. Her eyes were closing more frequently, wishing she could just sleep, and her body felt heavy with exhaustion. Abruptly, Minerva heard Yusa yell a warning. A goblin crept up behind her while she was preoccupied and unable to respond in time. Michelle easily defeated the goblin and his friends in spite of her exhaustion. Before they could even react, the monsters fell one by one as her blade, which glinted barely in the dim light, slid through the air. Everything happened so fast that it appeared the enemies had already been defeated and she had only made one hardly noticeable movement. Minerva finally declared that they had arrived, guiding them with the map. But as Merle looked around, he saw that they had reached a dead end. Her eyes glowed with doubt, but Yusuf saw her look and calmly explained that the dwarf had taught him a special spell that allowed him to enter hidden passages. The stone wall in front of them started to smoothly slide aside as he held out his hand and said a few words in an old language, revealing a well-lit room. A barely noticeable steam rose from the depths, promising long-awaited rest, and warm light streamed from within, reflecting off the smooth stone walls. According to Minerva's meticulous inspection of the room, there was not even the faintest indication of the monster's presence, not even a scratch or a smell. For a dungeon, everything appeared serene and immaculate. The steam coming from the map indicated that the source was directly behind the next door. The large space they were in was illuminated by the gentle glow of crystal set into the walls. Everyone listened to the silence and looked around. Soon after, Yusa went to the back door of the hall, openly curious to see what was inside. As they moved into the next room, they saw a large bathtub with steaming hot water in it. The room had an almost fairy tale feel to it as the warm water created dense clouds of steam that slowly rose to the ceiling. To Yusa's surprise, the spring was located in this very room. The warm bath delighted the others as well. Nobody had anticipated discovering such a comfortable place so far down in the dungeon. As though prepared especially for relaxation, the water was hot, clear, and surprisingly pleasant. Knowing how important it was for the girls to unwind after a long journey, Yusa graciously offered them the opportunity to use the restroom first. In order to give their friends some privacy and rest, he and Minerva went to the next room to wait their turn. Yusa thought Minerva was still upset or angry because he was standing off to the side, deep in thought. Minerva's tension only intensified the strange things that seemed to happen to him at hot springs. Trying to keep his tone lighthearted and firm, Yusa yelled at the girls to leave the restroom so they wouldn't stay too long. He didn't want to wait too long for his turn, but he also wanted to lighten the mood. As he waited his turn, Yusa pondered why, in contrast to other areas of the dungeon, there were no monsters in this room. Minerva clarified that the barrier enclosing the source, shielding it from external interference, was the reason for the absence of threats. Yusa suddenly had a great idea. He recalled a unique item from his pastry shop. Minerva noticed the box and asked inquisitively what it was. Yusa grinned as he opened it, and described it as a refrigerator that kept the cold out no matter how hot or cold the outside temperature was. He produced multiple bottles of ramen, a carbonated soft drink with a citrus flavor that increased blood flow. Additionally, he discovered a bottle of Nikki, a beverage with a cinnamon infusion that lowers fevers. It was an excellent product, and Yusa thought about putting a few more kinds of candy in the refrigerator as he looked at the bottles. It turned out that the drink controlled magical blood circulation, which piqued Minerva's interest. She chose to give it a try since it sounded really intriguing. Observing her interest, Yusuha suggested that she drink it after taking a bath because, according to him, it would taste even better and possibly affect her more favorably. As the girls came out of the bath, they couldn't stop complimenting the water. The warmth filled every cell of their bodies, and it was very pleasant. They experienced long-awaited relief and a sense of total harmony as their muscles relaxed and tension vanished after their bath. Yusa watched the girls and saw that after the bath, their skin looked much better. Their complexions brightened and their tone evened out, suggesting that the spring had a restorative as well as a restorative effect. Mira grinned as she held up a confection from Yusa's confectionery store and declared it to be absolutely amazing. Observing her joy, Yusa recalled that she had purchased it from him the previous day. It was a toy known as a water pistol, which could be loaded with water and fired at particular body pressure points. This produced a massage effect that eased tension and relaxed muscles, particularly in the lower back and shoulders. With the pistol in her hand, Mira revealed that she had suffered from stiff shoulders for a long time, but that this toy truly helped her by easing the tension and pain. Yusa was happy to hear that the toy gun truly performed as promised, and could understand why Mira was experiencing shoulder issues. He enthusiastically turned to Manurva, took 2 more of the same guns, and suggested that they give them a try as well. He was confident that it would ease her stress and enhance her health. However, Yusa was unable to comprehend what was happening when he saw Manurva moving in the other direction. Manurva was perplexed because she hadn't anticipated them taking a bath together. Manurva shuddered at the very thought of it. Feeling uncomfortable, he turned away and hurried to the hot spring. Yusa turned to face Merle and Mira and offered them some drinks from the fridge. The girls thanked him and gladly accepted. The drinks satisfied her thirst so well that Merle rushed to the refrigerator. Minerva and Yusa went to the next room to change and take a long overdue bath. Minerva apologized to Yusa and explained that he was new to this, which is why he was acting strangely. Perhaps things were a little different in this world than in his, Yusa thought, and grinned. He understood that each of them had a unique experience with such moments, and that it was critical to respect one another's individual boundaries and routines. Yusa didn't see why he needed to adjust to the new at all, even though Minerva said he could get used to it. Yusa decided not to think about it any longer and advised Minerva to quickly enter the bath. He was confident that everyone would be able to forget the uncomfortable moments and savor the present with rest and relaxation. Yusa's body instantly relaxed as he sank into the water. A pleasant warmth swept over him, relieving tension and exhaustion. He let out a sigh of relief and grinned, relishing the moment. The water was so beautiful that he looked back and yelled for Minerva to come quickly and join him. However, Yusa was taken aback by Minerva's appearance. Wearing a towel from head to toe, Minerva stood at the edge of the bathtub, looking very cautious. He asked if Yusa would mind if he used magic that blocked perception, saying that he wasn't ready to reveal his body just like his face. Despite his slight embarrassment, Yusa nodded tactfully, seeing nothing wrong with it if it helped Minerva feel more at ease. Minerva, still partially invisible by the spell, stepped cautiously into the water, acknowledging that one day Yusa would see everything. In an attempt to help his friend, Yusa calmly advised him not to worry too much about it. But it all sounded a little vague. With composure, Michelle entered the water and settled herself beside Yusuka. Yusa looked at Minerva, a little taken aback by his composure. When Minerva saw this look, he simply sank a little further into the water, comforting himself with the knowledge that his friend couldn't see anything anyway. The spell always hid everything that wasn't needed. Yusuf couldn't help but stare at the outline of his friend as he wondered how well developed Minerva's pectorals must be, as one might expect from an experienced explorer. With a strange curiosity he could not quite put his finger on, he looked closely at the outlines, which were barely visible through the light haze of steam and protective magic. Remembering that he wanted to test out his new product, a water pistol, Yusuf suddenly leaped into the water. But when he turned to find his belongings, he was shocked to see that the chair they were resting on was no longer there. As it happened, Mira had taken the chair. She was already running close by, grinning mischievously, with a water pistol in her hands, obviously ready to try it out. Michelle calmly offered to help after hearing Yusuha's issue. She instantly triggered her magic, causing a soft current of energy to flow through the water. Suddenly, 2 smooth stones that would make excellent chairs rose up out of the ground. Delighted, Yusa sat down on one of them right away and began working on his water pistol. With pleasure, he filled it with water and aimed, eager to try the toy out. Happy that everything was going according to plan, Yusa smiled and recommended that Minerva give the toy a try as well. Minerva reluctantly consented, understanding that he had no choice but to take part in this activity. After a brief hesitancy, Minerva stood beside Yusa, prepared to try something new. He grabbed the toy and aimed a water jet at his back. Observing Minerva's relaxation from the water pistol, Yusa inquired as to whether he enjoyed the toy. Minerva, who was seated close by, added that the action of the toy was really quite enjoyable. After giving it some thought, Yusa was compelled to concur, feeling his muscles relax due to the water's mild tremors. Given how challenging it was to hit that spot directly, Yusa advised Minerva that he could use a water pistol to shoot himself in the back. Minerva, on the other hand, took Yusuha's words entirely differently and felt extremely ashamed. His face flushed briefly, and he turned away without saying what it was that made him feel so ashamed. When Minerva heard Yusuha's suggestion, she hurried over to him and yelled in terror for him to reconsider. She threw him to the ground out of emotion. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Yusa, who was utterly bewildered by what had just transpired, changed the topic and advised Minerva to go get some ramen. Merle suddenly rushed directly at Yusa while holding the bottle and frantically attempting to open it, but she was too distraught to do so. Yusa responded rapidly, a little surprised by her panic. He calmed her down by demonstrating the correct way to open the bottle and finishing the task with ease. Merle smiled as she savored the sweet and pleasant beverage, feeling joyous as the taste of ramen filled her mouth. In the meantime, Mira was pleased not only with the flavor but also with the smoother and more stable sensation of her magical power within her. In addition to being delicious, the beverage really helped her stay strong. Among other things, Yusa thought the drink was very tasty after taking a sip and grinning. He relished its revitalizing flavor and the way it made him feel better and more at ease. Yusa sipped again and pondered. He hadn't had this beverage in almost a year. His mind started to conjure up pictures of fairs, summer vacations, and public baths where people would enjoy ramen. This drink had taken on a special meaning for him, connected to joy, warmth, and significant memories. Additionally, this drink became ingrained in his heart and inextricably linked to the memories of today. Yusa came to the realization that he would always treasure this particular moment. The whole group took in the view of the hot spring while sitting on a stone bench that Minerva had made. A pleasant atmosphere pervaded the space, and a waterfall in the corner added a homey touch. There were no monsters, everything was calm and quiet, and everyone could just unwind. Some people felt drowsy because of the serene atmosphere. After having such a great night's sleep, Mira felt rejuvenated and prepared to face new obstacles and monsters when she ventured to the dungeon's second floor. Mira appeared to have been enjoying a moment of total calm and relaxation, but everyone was taken aback when they saw that she was now prepared to begin her work. Everyone was taken aback by her resolve and turned to gaze at her in wonder. Every adventurer's attention was drawn to a new sign that appeared near the hot spring a week later. Everyone who passed by now understood that they could unwind and rejuvenate here. Minerva quickly used her earth magic to make a distinct division between the hot spring's male and female halves, guaranteeing everyone's comfort and seclusion. The demand for the water pistols Yusa had brought with him rose in tandem with the growing number of people looking to unwind and rest. His product was well received. Yusuha's business took off, and the popularity of water pistols soon brought in a new clientele for his confections. For adventurers, particularly those who had already encountered the hardships of dungeons, the massage the pistol offered following a strenuous adventure became a unique treat. Veterans, those same seasoned and experienced adventurers who had not previously been regular consumers of his confections, took notice of this innovation. The demand for beverages skyrocketed after the hot spring opened. Customers eagerly bought cool beverages and delighted in lounging in the water. Fruit juices became popular among those seeking to quench their thirst following treatments, and coffee with milk became popular among those seeking an energizing beverage after a long day. Another factor in the success was Yusa's suggestion that Mirai and Tsunagi collaborate because Tsunagi was crafting a new sword for him. They acknowledged that Yusuka had greatly benefited their company and thanked him for the invitation. The number of clients only grew every day, and everything ended up being far more successful than they could have imagined. The ball game also became a huge hit, drawing large groups of adventurers who were prepared to wait in line for hours in the hopes of getting their long-awaited cure. When Yusa heard that people were referring to the hot spring by his name, he felt a little ashamed. Although he felt flattered, he felt it was a bit much. Yusa was happy that the hot spring, whatever its name, had developed into a real refuge for intrepid travelers. He hoped that the fact that the springs were now a place to unwind, rejuvenate, and make new friends was more important than whether or not people still connected him to it. The soldiers suddenly rushed into the room, shouting that they wanted to know if Yahagi's candy store was there. Yusuf was immediately paralyzed by fear. Did the soldiers actually come to get him? The soldiers were instantly drawn to a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a richly dressed appearance who entered the room behind them. His clothes were immaculately elegant and costly, and he wore expensive jewelry that glittered on his fingers. His every move was confident and significant, and every aspect of his clothing conveyed his high social standing. Yusuf froze as he observed the man's gaping mouth. His mind was racing with questions. Who was he? Was this man a member of the nobility,